Making one of the biggest entrances ever, the fisherman came flying into the Clash Royale arena, where he started to beat all of the other troops mercilessly with his talking fish. He had shown his face for the first time ever in the Clash Royale arenas to warn all the other troops of an incoming flood. So in today's story, I will explain my version of who the fisherman was before he made it to the Clash Royale arenas, what caused the massive flood in the arenas, and most importantly, why the heck the fisherman has a talking fish.
Maurice, they're not listening!
Find out all of that inside of today's video, the fisherman's origin story. Before the full story actually starts, let me give you some context for today's video. Our troops inside of the Clash of Clans village and Clash Royale arenas all battle extremely hard for us. They literally put their lives on the line as they rush into battles and so forth. Although this is the only side of the troops that we ever get to see, when they're not battling to the death, what are they doing? Well, one of the things that all of the troops do in their free time is recharge for their next battles by sleeping and eating. But one lifelong unanswered question has always been, what on earth do our troops eat? Well, they get their food from a number of places, and thankfully it's not from eating their own hogs. Instead, they get all of their fruit and veggies and most meats from a farm not too far away called Heyday, and then they also get a lot of their food from the fishermen. Some troops are born barbarians, some are born giants, and some troops are just born regular villagers who aren't meant to fight in the arenas. Instead, they do regular everyday villager things, like for example, fish for food. Now today's story is going to follow around a regular villager who became a fisherman and whose name is Maurice. Maurice was born a regular villager, and his dad happened to be a fisherman. And so growing up, his dad taught him the ropes, and Maurice eventually became a successful independent fisherman as well. Over time, Maurice became an incredibly talented fisherman and always outfished the rest of the fishermen by catching the majority of the fish. He was very well respected around the Clash of Clans village and Clash Royale arenas, as he could almost single-handedly supply both the clashes with tons of fish. And by catching so many fish, he himself got to eat a lot of them. So he ended up growing a ton and becoming significantly bigger than the rest of the fishermen. He was also so invested in his job that he would never stop by the villages for long. He would typically drop off the fish and then sail straight back into the sea to catch more fish. He was so invested, in fact, that on July 1st, 2019, when a serious storm was reported and all of the other fishermen came back to dock their boats, Maurice decided that he wasn't afraid of any storm and that he was still going to go out and fish and catch the most fish. He wanted to prove to everyone that he was a badass that wasn't afraid of anything. And so he set sail out into the chaotic sea. Once he was out there, the sea was incredibly rough. The wind was blowing at hundreds of kilometers per hour, and the waves were as tall as wizard towers. The storm felt as if it was just raining lightning and tornado spells. And in fact, that's not too far off. That is exactly what happened. Apparently back in the wizard's laboratory, a wizard accidentally knocked over a tornado spell, which broke and ended up twirling around and picking up all the other spell bottles, including the rage spells, lightning spells, and more tornado spells. The tornado ended up throwing all of those spell bottles into the water, which caused the enormous storm. And then the storm ended up going as far as the Clash of Clans village. And when the storm got to the Clash village, unfortunately there was a dark elixir storage container being upgraded at the time, and so it was extra fragile. And on top of that, it just so happened to be placed right next to the water. And so when the storm came by, it ended up destroying the fragile dark elixir container, and then the full dark elixir container ended up spilling out and all of that dark elixir poured into the ocean. And as many of you know, dark elixir is one of the most powerful substances in the world of Clash, where it has turned barbarians into barbarian kings and archers into archer queens, and is responsible for some of the most powerful troops as well. So when the dark elixir poured into the ocean, it ended up causing all of the fish that it had come in contact with to mutate. And luckily though, since there was a storm, there weren't too many fish near the coast of the Clash of Clans village, so not too many of them were affected, although it did still cause a few fish to mutate. Anyway, back to Maurice's boat. As he continued to sail, he was unable to catch many fish since most of them swam deeper into the sea to find calmer waters. Maurice was having a very tough time and wanted to call it quits and head back, but he was so determined to catch more than all the other fishermen that he needed to catch at least one fish before he went back. And so he kept sailing. He eventually got close to the Clash of Clans village, where he thought he heard some screams. He made his way over to where the screams were coming from, and as he got closer, the water started to turn a lot darker. But yet, he still didn't see anyone. Instead, he just saw a fish jumping in and out of the black water. Yet, he continued to hear the screams. And so when Maurice saw the fish, he tossed his grappling hook at it and caught it. And when he brought it back to the ship, he thought he heard someone talking to him. He looked up and questioned, "God?" But then he kept hearing the talking, but not from the sky, and instead he looked down and saw that it was somehow the fish that was doing the talking. It turned out that the power of the dark elixir ended up causing the fish to be able to speak. And not only that, now the fish could breathe above water too. The fisherman was obviously dumbfounded by his discovery of a talking and breathing fish, but unfortunately before they could get too acquainted, something else happened. As the dark elixir sunk deeper into the ocean, it eventually hit the sea where it reacted with some of the underwater volcanoes, and caused a massive eruption. The eruption pushed all of the water up, essentially causing a tsunami. This giant wall of water ended up popping up behind the fisherman and his newfound fish friend. When the wave popped up, the fisherman and the fish both looked at each other and then immediately started paddling away as fast as they could. The good news was that the fisherman was the best fisherman in all of the Clash universe, and so he was able to paddle away faster than the tsunami behind him. But the bad news was that the tsunami was heading straight for the Clash Royale arenas, and so since the fisherman was faster than the tsunami, he got to the arena first, but only by a few seconds. The fisherman needed to warn everyone that a giant tsunami and flood was coming, but he didn't have time to simply walk around the arena and walk through the front door. So instead he grabbed his grapple hook and was about to take off, but then he heard his fish yelling at him, "Hey, what about me?" So without having much time to think about it, the fisherman grabbed the talking fish and he threw the grappling hook up. The grapple hook wrapped around one of the arena pillars, and then the fisherman jumped and launched himself over the arena wall, where he landed in the middle of the battlefield. He then started going around trying to warn everyone of the incoming flood, but no one seemed to listen. And so the fish spoke up and told that they needed to be a bit more aggressive with how they were going to warn them. And so the fish went around and started to fish slap all the troops until they listened. Finally, all the troops stopped battling and turned around to see a giant wall of water rushing towards them. And the last thing that the troops heard before they got washed over by the water was Tomb Raider. Anyway, after the water from the floor finally drained away, all of the troops stood there wondering what the heck just happened. But for Maurice, now that the water was all gone, that meant the fisherman could return back to his day job. But before he could leave the arena, the Red King and Blue King stopped him. They both told him that what he did in the arena before the flood came really impressed them, and they would love it if he could stay and fight in their army. The fisherman said that he wasn't too sure, he didn't really want to. But the kings then told him that they could give him a legendary status and pay him a generous amount of gold if he stayed. The fisherman thought it over a little bit, and ended up deciding to stay finally. Mainly because as a fisherman he always wanted to get that next big catch. But now that he caught a breathing and talking fish, he felt like he could never catch anything better than that. It was pretty much the ultimate catch. And so he decided to stay in the arena. And that there is the story of how the fisherman was brought into the world of Clash. One of the first ever troops in Clash of Clans and the newest troop added into the Clash Royale arenas is the Wall Breaker, a single skeleton who seems way too overly attached to its bomb. So how was this OG troop brought into the world of Clash, and how did he end up making it to the Clash Royale arenas? Here is the Clash of Clans and Clash Royale crossover story on the Wall Breaker's origin story. The story of the Wallbreaker actually starts off with a barbarian named Scully. Back in the village, the barracks was working overtime, pumping out hundreds of troops as fast as it could. The chief had ordered the army to train up a barge attack, so the village was getting pretty hectic since there were so many troops. The barracks was transforming the elixir that was produced from the pumps into the troops using some sort of special magic produced by the wizards. Anyway, amongst those hundreds of barbarians and archers were produced, Scully was one of them. And then briefly after Scully was created, the chief ordered the troops to battle, since he was gemming the barracks and he wanted to get the most out of the boost. So the barbarians and archers marched off to battle, and decided to attack the very first base that they came across. Unfortunately, the first base that they came across was a whole town hall above theirs, and they were seriously outmatched. The battle went pretty much as anyone would have expected, where all the barbarians and archers barely made a dent in the base. It was coming down to the end of the battle, and as the troops were picking off all the outside buildings, they were actually coming surprisingly close to getting a 1-star at 50%. The chief was holding on to Scully and a few other archers to hopefully clean up any final buildings in case they needed it. And near the end of the battle, all other troops had been killed. They turned into elixir and sunk into the ground of the battlefield. The army had cleared 48% of all buildings, and now it was up to just Scully to take out 2 more buildings to bring home the win. There was one building on the outside of the wall still that he could finish off, and one more right inside the walls with no defenses anywhere close to it. It was foolproof. So the chief deployed Scully on the outside building, and he took that out with ease, 49% and 1% more to go. Then Scully made his way to the other defense, but instead of running around the walls to the opening, he decided to try and destroy the wall instead. It was a dumb mistake and a costly one too, because right beside the wall was a bomb. Scully wound up getting stuck on that wall for so long that it gave the bomb enough time to charge up and explode on him before he could get to that last building. Scully's stupid mistake of attacking that wall instead of going around costed him his life and the village the win. Scully evaporated into elixir immediately and then sunk into the ground. And the next day, the witch came by and raised the fallen troops as she usually does, and they rose out of the ground as skeletons. But there was one troop that stuck out amongst the rest. That skeleton was Scully, because he was carrying a bomb with him as well. It turned out that the Clash gods had cursed him for losing the battle for his village, and now he would not be able to ever let go of that very bomb that had killed him. His life source basically was connected to that bomb that took his life, so if he ever let go, he would die again. Scully was obviously not happy about this burden that he now carried, and the fact that he had to carry around a giant heavy bomb with him everywhere. So he carried a bit of a grudge against a wall piece. Scully was so pissed off by the fact that he let the village down, and that it was a single wall that got in his way, that he wanted nothing more than to get revenge on that wall. So the very next battle, without the chief knowing, Scully tagged along in battle. He only had one goal in mind, and that was to get to that wall and destroy it. So once the battle had commenced, Scully waited for the other troops to take the front lines, and once the defenses were distracted, Scully started running. He dodged and weaved through many flying cannonballs and arrows, and he quickly dodged from the wizard's fireballs and merely missed by some mortar strikes. He continued to make his way closer to the wall, and somehow miraculously got right next to the wall. Still holding onto the bomb, he sat there as he lit the bomb. Scully felt a small feeling of relief as he felt that he had redeemed himself for his past failure. Then a few seconds later, the bomb went off, and the wall was blown into oblivion. Watching this from a distance, the chief was shocked at what he just saw, a single skeleton who just wiped out an entire small row of walls. The chief was super impressed and wanted Scully to permanently join the village's army. Scully, who was just brought back to life again after the battle, since he was just a skeleton, later agreed to join as this would provide him with an opportunity to further make up for his failures, where the army would rely on him to open up paths for them, and also he would be able to continuously get revenge on the walls. This was great for Scully as he enjoyed what he was doing. He got constant revenge on the walls, the army relied on him, plus he made up for his mistake. Life was good, and based off what he was doing, he was now called the Wallbreaker too, which he liked as well. And the new Wallbreaker in Clash of Clans got to do this for a long time, but all good things must come to an end, because after a few years the Wallbreaker's abilities were no longer needed as badly. With new additions of the jump spell and then the earthquake spells, it started to take away from the demand for the Wallbreaker, but that was okay. Scully still got some decent usage rates, and he was still happy with that. But where things really went sideways was when the builder created the Wall Wrecker, which just by the sounds of it sounded way better than the Wall Breaker. So once the Wall Wrecker was added, the Wall Breaker had enough. There was nothing left for him in Clash of Clans. So he finally decided to make his way over to the Clash Royale arenas with the rest of the troops, and he went to go battle there. For the first bit, it was difficult for the Wall Breaker to adjust, but to fix that, he simply started visualizing that the King's Towers were just other pieces of walls that he wanted to destroy. And then he had no problem running full speed at it and blowing himself up. And that there is the story of how the Wallbreaker was brought into the world of Clash. Make sure you come back in a few days to watch the second part of the story to find out how the Wallbreaker ended up breaking his curse and ended up becoming the Bomber. If you guys missed part 1 of the story, you can check that out by clicking the I in the top right of the screen right now, or just search for the Wallbreaker's origin story part 1. Unlike his relatives, the Bomber is smart enough to throw the bomb away before it explodes, whereas the Wallbreaker likes to hold onto it until it blows up on him. But if you were following the first part of the story, you will know that there is a very good reason for this, and that is because the Wallbreaker was cursed by the Clash gods when he died, an embarrassing death back when he decided to attack a wall instead of running around, and then he got killed by a single bomb. This caused the Wallbreaker to forever hold a curse that prevented him from ever letting go of the very bomb that killed him. And since then, the Wallbreaker had always been determined to get revenge on any wall that he could by blowing it to smithereens. Recently this month, the Wallbreaker finally made his way to the Clash Royale arena when he started to run out of work in the Clash of Clans village, since his job was being replaced by jump spells, earthquakes, flying troops, and wall wreckers. But the Bomber has been at the Clash Royale arena for nearly 3 years, so how did the Bomber get into the Clash Royale arenas way before the Wallbreaker ever did? And how did he break the unbreakable spell that cursed him to forever hold on to his bomb? Find out in part 2 of the Wallbreaker's story in the Bomber's origin story. Before we get into today's video, I wanted to let you guys know that I will be hosting a small giveaway for everyone who subscribes to my second channel called Variance Music. I will be giving away 2 prizes of $25, and I will be paying it out through PayPal if you have it, or I will purchase an iTunes or Google Play gift card of your choice. To enter, just click the first link in the description below and subscribe to Variance Music, and you will be automatically entered. I will be doing the draw on June 30th and announcing it shortly after, so make sure to check back then. And anyways, let's go ahead and get into today's video. 3 years ago, a brand new royal king came riding into the Clash of Clans village. To be clear though, this was not the same king that we are familiar with in today's arenas. It was neither the red king or the blue king. Rather, it was the third king that was a part of the Clash Royale arenas before the beta of the game ever came out. And there will be a reason as to why you've never heard of this king, explained later in the story. He rode on his pony and wore his shiny crown, letting all the troops know just how important he was. Immediately when all the troops saw him, they stopped what they were doing and stared. The king looked at them and told them that he was one of the kings of a brand new place called Clash Royale, and they were recruiting the best of the best to come join them. He then offered a few incentives for them to come with him. He said that they could come battle against some of the strongest troops in the land, including ones that they had never encountered before, and then he name-dropped the musketeer, the baby dragon, and the giant skeleton. He also offered that the troops would get to fight in state-of-the-art stadiums with roaring crowds, and best of all, the king said that he would even pay them all double what they were making right now. But then one of the goblins raised his hand and told the king that they weren't even being paid right now. So to that, the king told the goblin, "Well then, I guess I'll start paying you guys." The idea of actually being paid to battle, which they were basically doing already for free, seemed like an amazing opportunity. So all of the troops agreed to go, and the village chief didn't even seem to have a problem with this, since he knew he couldn't compete with what the king was offering, plus the fact that he had 4 barracks and 2 dark barracks ready to produce more troops once they all left. So all the troops were getting ready to leave. Well, all of the troops except for one, the Wallbreaker. The Wallbreaker had no reason to leave since his only goal in life was to destroy walls, and he wouldn't be able to do that in the Clash Royale arena since there were no walls. And not to mention, at this point, there were no wall wreckers taking his job, so he was still in high demand in the Clash of Clans village. This really ticked off the king though, since he had never been said no to before, and he really wanted every single troop to come with him. Plus, he had promised the red and blue king that he would bring back every single troop with him back to the Clash Royale arenas. So there was no way he could come back with less than all of them. So he had to try extra hard to get the Wallbreaker to come with. So he went to the Wallbreaker and asked him why he didn't want to come. The Wallbreaker quickly explained that he just wanted to destroy walls, and he had no need for being paid in gold since he couldn't really do anything with it anyways. And even if he wanted to go, he said he had some stupid curse on him where he couldn't even let go of his bomb, so he would just die the first time he got there. The king listened to all of this and then formulated a mini plan on how he could get the Wallbreaker to come with him to the Clash Royale arenas. The king went to the village chief to ask him about the Wallbreaker's curse, but the king refused to tell him. Then the king whipped out a bag of gold, and then the king immediately started spilling the beans. He told him how the Wallbreaker had died in a battle and was cursed to forever hold the bomb. The king then asked if there was any possible way to break the curse. To that, the village chief responded with, "The only person that might be able to reverse this curse is the witch. But be warned, the witch usually charges a very high price for stuff like this." The king was so used to always getting what he wanted, so he went to go confront the witch. He asked the witch what it would take for her to lift the spell on the Wallbreaker's curse. He was expecting the witch to demand a bunch of gold or something, but what she did ask for was completely different. The witch asked the king for, first off, a strong buff or a power potion for when she did get to the Clash Royale arenas, which the king shrugged off and said, "Okay, that's easy, no problem." Then the next thing she asked for was that she wanted to be considered an epic troop within the Clash Royale arenas, which the king also shrugged off and was like, "Okay, no big deal." But the last thing that the witch asked for was something crazy and unforeseen. The witch asked the king for his soul. She explained that to lift a curse from one cursed soul, she would have to remove it to someone else's and replace it. The king was shocked for a second, wondering what the heck the witch just asked for. The king was a little conflicted by this once he figured out what was going on, because obviously he didn't want to lose his soul, and be cursed, but also if he went back without the wall breaker, his brothers, or the other kings, would both be extremely disappointed in him for breaking his promise and would never let him forget about it. So the king had convinced himself, since he really didn't want this to happen and that would almost be worse than being dead, that this was the only way and that he would grant the witch her 3 demands. So the witch happily obliged, where she received power potions for her buff and a purple card that would be used in the Clash Royale arena. And then for the final demand, she gathered the king and the wallbreaker together and started up some sort of spell. She chanted, and then smoke rose up from the feet of both the king and the wallbreaker. Then all of a sudden, it disappeared. The wallbreaker emerged looking the same as always, but then he looked at his bomb and released his fingers. And for the first time in forever, the bomb slipped out of his hands and he let go of it. The curse had been lifted. Now the wallbreaker would be free to throw bombs wherever he wanted without being killed at the same time. And for this, he would forever be grateful to the king for the sacrifice, and he would join him back to the Clash Royale arenas, now called the Bomber. The Royal Ghost is one of the most unique troops in the entire Clash universe, being the only troop who can turn invisible and completely avoid any troop attacks until he attacks them first from the shadows. He is a gruesome troop to be reckoned with, and a troop of this caliber deserves his very own origin story, so stay tuned as part 3 of the Wallbreaker's origin story continues in the final episode inside of the Royal Ghost origin story. Shortly after the witch removed the curse from the wallbreaker and transferred a curse to the Clash Royale king, the wallbreaker ended up learning to throw his bomb rather than bear hugging it before it exploded. This was absolutely great news for the wallbreaker, who could now be a super powerful and unique troop in the Clash Royale arenas. However, the king on the other hand was not so lucky. When the smoke lifted from his side, he looked less like his original self, and by that I mean you could see through him, like a ghost. The king's ghost looked down at his hands and looked up, asking himself, "What have I done?" The king felt so embarrassed and powerless that he couldn't even bring himself to go back to the Clash Royale arenas. He felt that his brothers, the other kings, would not be very accepting of his new self, and would look down on him forever. So the Ghost King decided that he wasn't going to go back, so instead of showing the troops how to get back, he took them almost all the way there, and once they were in sight of the arena, the king pointed and showed them where it was, and then he told the troops to go on without him and that he would catch up with them later. So the troops kept making their way to the arena while the king stood there, with no intentions of ever following them. The Red and Blue King were so excited to see all the new troops. After giving them a short training and orientation on how things were done in the Clash Royale arenas, the troops were off to the races and started battling it out in the arenas. All while this was happening, the other king, that was turned into a ghost, found a nearby abandoned castle where he started to make it his home. He had even paid some other troops to bring him all of his personal treasures and personal belongings, and for many years the king stayed in this castle, just tiredly sitting there, doing absolutely nothing. He just kept thinking to himself how the kings would never welcome him back like this, and how they only even needed 2 kings to do the battles anyways. And it went like this for nearly 3 years. At a certain point though, the Ghost King started to wonder if his brothers, or the other kings, even cared about him, because from his castle he would always watch them, and he noticed that they never ever tried looking for him. They never sent out a search party, or looked sad, or did anything to try and find their long lost brother. So the Ghost King took this pretty hard and felt betrayed by his 2 other brothers, and thought to himself that they never even cared for him, which made a bit of sense since they were always the competitive type, but he felt that when it comes to losing a brother that they would put aside their differences and actually care for their lost brother, or at least look a little bit sad, rather than just moving on and trying to destroy each other. And when the Ghost King thought of that, an idea hit him. If his brothers didn't care about him and only cared about destroying each other, then the Ghost King would give them a taste of their own medicine. He then decided that he was done sitting around in his empty castle and that it was time that he paid his brothers in the Clash Royale arena a visit. So he phased through the castle walls and then decided to make a grand entrance by popping up in front of a Hog Rider push in the Clash Royale arenas. He wound up shocking the entire crowd, but most importantly, he shocked the kings. He then went on to destroy the King Tower to truly show the king who was boss. The Ghost King realized that he had a really powerful ability and that he could use it to not only dominate troops in the Clash Royale arena, but also dominate his brothers with. So with his new disappearing ability, he became a legendary card that could change the tide of any battle, with the final goal of taking out the King's Towers. He was definitely a troop that you want on your team. In the arena, since he was a Ghost King, the other troops later started to call him the Royal Ghost. And that there is the story of how the Royal Ghost was brought into the world of Clash. Hey guys, before we get into today's story, I just quickly wanted to mention two things. First off, this is not at all what really happened to the Barbarian King, and it's just a backstory, a fan backstory made by me, and in no way am I associated with Supercell, so all of this is just one person's random story on how the Barbarian King became the Gladiator King. For the longest time, the Barbarian King has been one of the most powerful troops in all of Clash of Clans. He's been around the village for the longest time as well, and with that, he has become one of the most popular troops in the entire village. Alongside the Archer Queen and then the Grand Warden, together they can single-handedly take out almost half of a base. Amongst those three, the Barbarian King is the tanky troop, but even as a tank, he still dishes out a considerable amount of damage. He helped the village achieve many great milestones, all the way from helping the village loot enough resources to reach new town hall levels, all the way to coming in clutch in clan wars and trophy pushing attacks. He's really done it all. And while doing all of this, he has always been in search of his long-lost best friend, Barbar, who he had lost in a tragic balloon accident a long time ago. The king would send out random search parties looking far and wide, but they would never be able to find his friend Barbar. But recently, 2 summers ago, he had finally found his friend. Of all places, he found Barbar on an island inhabited by someone known as the Master Builder. Apparently, this was considered the builder base, and this is now where Barbar lived. At first, the Barbarian King didn't recognize Barbar since he hadn't seen him in such a long time, and plus he had changed a lot since he last saw him. But finally, he had recognized him, and after a really long time, they were reunited, and the Barbarian King had felt as if he had accomplished everything he had ever set out to do. Well, at least he thought he had. Because one day, a strange man came riding into the Clash of Clans village on his pony. The man on the horse claimed to be a king. He also claimed to be from a brand new place that he and the other kings like to call Clash Royale. The king came to the Clash of Clans village, and he basically started giving all the troops offers that they couldn't resist, and then he handpicked them and took them to the Clash Royale arena. He even offered the Barbarian King a spot in the Clash Royale arena, and the Barbarian King was sort of honored because he had never really met a real king before. He wasn't really a king himself, since he was just the king of the barbarians, whereas this other king that had offered him a spot was a legitimate king with gold and other riches, a throne, a castle, and all of that. So all of the troops made their way to the Clash Royale arena, and it was sort of a long journey, but they finally made it. The king and all the other troops were so far very happy since they were all being paid generously and the king was treating them very well. The new king even gave all of the troops a full tour of the arena and showed them all around. Then once all of the tours and stuff had finished, the king showed the troops over to the training arena, where troops were given a chance to try out some friendly battles. All the troops performed really well, and the king seemed very pleased with all of them. But then when it came to be the Barbarian King's turn in the arena, he didn't do as well as expected. For starters, in his first battle he went up against the Pekka, and he got absolutely destroyed. They both costed the same amount of elixir, but the battle wasn't even close. Then when they went up against each other again and again, the Barbarian King just kept losing over and over again. But that's okay. Sometimes troops that cost the same amount of elixir aren't always equal, and some of the same price troops beat the other all the time due to different strengths and weaknesses that they have and different advantages that they bring on the battlefield. But since the king wanted to help out the Barbarian King, since he was one of the royalties from the Clash of Clans village, he had created him a bunch of special brand new armor that he was told would boost his health, but in reality all it really did was give him a confidence boost. The new armor looked pretty sweet, where it almost made the Barbarian King look like a gladiator. But even with the new armor, there was still another big problem. The part that really sucked for the Barbarian was that after every battle he had to take an hour-long nap, every single time. This was a massive problem that the Clash Royale King had, and he really couldn't fix it, because he couldn't be having after every single battle, having to wait a whole hour just so that he could battle someone else again, whereas all the other troops were immediately ready to go just like that. So unfortunately, there was no need for the Barbarian King anymore at the Clash Royale arenas because of his napping issue. The Barbarian King was kind of upset by this, and the Clash Royale King saw this, and so he told the Barbarian King that he could keep the super sick new battle armor that he had created him. And he even said that he would create the Barbarian King some cool new armors in the future. This seemed to make the Barbarian King feel a bit better about himself, so he wished the rest of the troops good luck and thanked the king, and then made his way back home. When he got back to the Clash of Clans village, everyone stared and admired at his brand new armor. The Archer Queen came up to him and said that he looked exactly like a gladiator. and the Barbarian King kind of liked the sounds of that, and so he decided to formally change his name to the Gladiator King. And that there is the story on how the Barbarian King became the Gladiator King. 2 months ago, the Barbarian King got a serious aesthetic upgrade by being converted from the Barbarian King into the Gladiator King. If you missed the video explaining how that happened, you can check it out by clicking the I in the top right of the screen right now. But now, after realizing that the armor didn't make him as powerful as he was expecting to be, the Barbarian King is determined to find a new set of armor that will truly make him one of the most powerful heroes in the Clash of Clans village. The Barbarian King's journey will be explained in today's story of how the Barbarian King became the Pekka King. And before we get into today's video, I wanted to let you guys know that I will be hosting a very small giveaway for everyone who subscribes to my second channel called Variance Music. I will be giving away 2 prizes of $25, and I will pay it out through PayPal if you have it, or I will purchase an iTunes or Google Play gift card of your choice. And to enter, all you have to do is click the first link in the description below and subscribe to Variance Music, and you'll already be automatically entered. And you can also get bonus entries just by commenting on the Variance Music videos or on any of these videos on World of Clash. I'll be doing the draw on April 30th and announcing it shortly after that, so make sure you check back then. And anyways, let's go ahead and get into today's video. So a few months ago, the Barbarian King was extremely excited and proud of his new set of armor that he had just gotten from the Clash Royale King. But when he got back to the Clash of Clans village, he quickly found out that the armor didn't make him any stronger than he was before. The king believed that this was because he had simply received some sort of faulty armor from the Clash Royale King, so the king went back to the Clash Royale arena to ask the Clash Royale King for a new set of armor. But unfortunately, the king of the Clash Royale arena said that that was the last set of armor that he had, and they didn't make those anymore. So the king was forced to come back to the Clash of Clans village empty-handed, unfortunately. The king was pretty upset now that he had gone through all this work of getting the armor for absolutely nothing. But he still did believe that whatever armor he was wearing had the possibility of making him stronger. So one day he was sitting around pondering what was the strongest type of armor that he could get access to and get a hold of. Then when he was sitting there, he saw an army approaching his base. It was an all-out raid with golems, wizards, and pekkas, an OG go-wipe attack. The king was forced to stand his ground and defend his base as he always does, but when the army approached him, he ended up getting faced in a one-on-one situation against the pekka. In the fight, the Barbarian King took the first swing, slashing his sword against the pekka's armor. The sword weakly bounced off of the armor as if it hadn't even affected the pekka. Then the pekka came back with a full-out swing and knocked the king out good. The army then went on to wipe out the rest of the base, and 1 hour later, after the Barbarian King was finished recovering, he popped up and had a great idea. He wanted to get his hands on the same armor of the pekkas. But then he thought a little bit more about it. He literally just got his butt kicked, so there was literally no way that he could take the armor through force. Instead, he was going to have to go to the creator of the pekka, or the source of the pekka, to get another set of armor specially made for him. And the king knew that there was only one person capable of making such a high quality and sturdy set of armor in the Clash of Clans village. The builder. So the Barbarian King went to go find the builder. It shouldn't be too hard to find the builder since he was most likely just somewhere in the village working on an upgrade. But when the Barbarian King did finally find the builder, he was too busy to talk. He had been working tirelessly on upgrades for the past week and was too exhausted to talk at all. So the Barbarian King was forced to wait until he was finished doing some of those upgrades. But then when the builder did finally finish doing his upgrades a few weeks later and had some free time, he left to go to the Clash Royale arenas to unwind. Apparently, whenever the builder was lucky enough to get some free time, he liked to spend it relaxing and watching battles in the arena. So this meant that the Barbarian King was forced to go track down the builder over at the Clash Royale arenas. So the king packed up his sword and his helmet and then started his journey over to the arenas. Once he got to the arena, he began looking for the builder. Finding the builder was a whole lot easier than he had expected, since the builder was one of the most rowdy fans in the whole arena. The king went over to the builder, but had to wait until the battle was finished, since the builder was way too into the battle. And once the battle did finally finish, the builder sat down and stopped screaming at the top of his lungs. The king decided to keep it short and simple since the next battle would be starting very soon. The king asked the builder if he would be able to create a new set of armor for him that were made of some sort of special material, the same as the pekkas. The king asked the builder if he would be able to create a new set of armor for him that were made of the same materials as the pekkas. The builder responded to the king, telling him that Since he didn't have a lot of free time, he would do it for the Barbarian King under a few conditions. One, that he could get a special statue of him made in the Clash of Clans village. Since the builder couldn't just build the special statue, it had to be bought using only gems. And two, that he could get a few of those special potions that put the builder into overdrive. And last but not least, the builder said that he was tired of constantly having his builder hut destroyed. He was done with having to constantly rebuild it and have it destroyed and rebuild it over and over again. So he wanted his builder hut moved inside of the walls of the base and to be heavily protected so that there was less of a chance of having it destroyed. The king thought about it for a few seconds, knowing that a lot of his requests were going to be hard to justify to the Archer Queen, since he would have to get access to their stash of gems in order to pay for these potions and statues without being noticed. But finally, the Barbarian King determined that it would be worth it and that he really needed this Pekka's armor. So the Barbarian King told the builder that he had himself a deal. So once the Barbarian King got back to the village, he snuck into the town hall and went down into their vault and grabbed as many gems as he could carry. He then took those gems and bought himself the statue of the builder and placed it at the top of the base. 1 down, 2 to go. Next up, he took the gems to the trader and bought himself 5 of those special blue builder potions. And lastly, he had to figure out a way to get the builder's hut inside of the base without making anyone else mad or suspicious. So the Barbarian King had to take a bit of a blow by switching his spot inside the base with the builder hut. It was a huge shot to his ego, but eventually he thought that it would all be worth it. So once he finalized the switch, he went and met the builder. The builder was very pleased with the Barbarian King's efforts, and the builder said that he would get started straight away on the Pekka's armor. But first, the builder had to find the original designs for the Pekka's armor since he hadn't used it in forever. It took him a while, but eventually he found it hidden deep inside of the laboratory. And once he found the designs, he used one of those new builder potions that he just received and finished the armor in no time. He then went to go meet the Barbarian King, where he handed him his new set of brand new Pekka's armor. The king tried on the new Pekka's armor and it fit perfectly. The Barbarian King looked at himself inside of a mirror and almost jumped in fright when he saw himself. The new armor made him look 10 times more threatening, and he was very pleased with his new armor. He looked like a cooler version of the Pekka's, and he was already embracing the new look. So much, in fact, that he insisted that all the other troops started calling him the Pekka King. And that there is the story on how the Barbarian King became the Pekka King. The Goblin Cage is the newest troop inside of the Clash Royale arenas, and Supercell has told us a little bit about how the Goblin Brawler had become trapped inside of his cage, but Supercell only told us the ending of the story, and left out some key parts such as why the Goblin Brawler was put into prison, and most importantly why this goblin is bigger and stronger than all other goblins. So here in today's story, I will try to fill in all the holes in the full Goblin Cage's origin story. So long before the Goblin Brawler was ever put in jail, he was just a regular, good old greedy goblin. This goblin's name was Cage. He grew up just like any other goblin. He attended school, tried to learn English, failed miserably, and resorted to stealing for a living. Cage was even a part of the famous goblin team that stole all of the elixir from an elixir collector and storage in the Clash of Clans village. In fact, when he and his team pulled off that huge heist, they got so much respect from all the other goblins in the Clash of Clans village and Clash Royale arenas. Unfortunately though, the rest of the troops didn't seem to have the same level of respect for the goblins. In fact, everyone was so upset and angry about this incident that it gave the goblins a really bad stereotype where whenever something went missing, they would immediately blame the goblins for it, even if it was just something they forgot where they put. Normally this wasn't a problem because typically things didn't go missing on their own, and usually it was the goblins' fault anyways, so they didn't mind being blamed for them. But then one day, something went missing that the goblins and Cage had absolutely nothing to do with. And yet, they still got blamed. What happened was, one day after a hog rider went out to go buy himself a brand new whip, and by whip I mean a new hog, so he left his hog back home and went to go to the local hog dealership. After spending hours and hours there looking at all the different kinds of hogs, he decided that none of these hogs were right for him. So he went back home. But when he got back, his hog was gone. He immediately notified the authorities, and then the authorities went out and arrested all the goblins nearby, including Cage. The authorities then lined up all the goblins and then had the hog rider point and choose which goblin he saw stealing his hog. The hog rider obviously didn't really know, since he never actually saw anyone or any goblin steal his hog. It simply disappeared, and as per usual, the goblins were blamed for the disappearance. Even the goblins thought one of the other goblins just stole the hog, so they assumed they were at fault. So when the hog rider decided to randomly point at Cage, everyone just believed him without a doubt in their mind. And the hog rider simply wanted to blame a random goblin just so that he wouldn't be the one at fault for losing his hog. So the authorities escorted Cage away and locked him away in the most secured prison of them all, underneath the Clash Royale arena. All the other goblins and troops then continued on their way as if nothing happened. Cage was infuriated by what happened, not just towards the justice system or the other troops, but also towards his fellow goblins, because he was falsely accused and put in prison for the rest of his life for something he didn't do. But more than anything, he was mad at the hog rider for lying and putting him in prison, and he vowed that one day he would make him pay for what he did. And for years, Cage was locked in his cell, with nothing but time on his hands. But to spend his free time, Cage would work out. He would literally work out all day, every day. When he wasn't eating or sleeping, he was doing push-ups or pull-ups, and of course, he never skipped leg day. By doing squats and all other sorts of CrossFit, he got into amazing shape. But the types of exercises isn't the point. The point is that Cage was jacked. He was by far the strongest goblin ever seen in either the Clash of Clans village or the Clash Royale arenas. And then one day, in the middle of his workout section, he was interrupted by a guard and a hog rider. It was the exact hog rider that had caused him to be locked away in the first place. The hog rider apologized to the goblin, telling him some super sad sob story, and told him that it turned out his hog wasn't actually stolen. He had just lost it when he forgot to tie it to the post when he left to go buy his new hog.
So, turns out my hog wasn't stolen.
It turned out that the hog had just run away and only come back recently when he got hungry. So the guards let Cage free, but with all that built up anger inside of Cage, he wanted to get revenge on the hog rider. So as soon as he was set free, he punched the hog rider twice in the eyes and was about to continue pounding on him until the guards came in and broke the fight up. Cage ended up causing the hog rider to become blind, and then the guards ended up prosecuting Cage even further, where they wrestled Cage to the ground and locked him back up. The hog rider then found his way back home after bumping into tons of walls and trees. So now it looked like Cage really was going to be locked away in prison for the rest of his life, this time for something he did do. This time though, Cage knew that he was in prison for a legitimate reason, so he had no one to blame for it. So instead of being focused on revenge and working out, he was focused on escaping from prison. So for the following months, Cage used a spoon to dig himself a hole out of the prison. Then finally in mid-May 2019, he had fully dug himself out. So when the guards weren't looking, he jumped into the hole and climbed to the top. But when he got to the top and poked his head out of the hole, he saw that he was trapped inside of a larger cage. It turned out that the guards weren't total idiots and saw him digging a hole, so they had placed the cage at the end of the tunnel in anticipation of his escape. They could have just gone into the cage and arrested him there, but they were actually so afraid of the goblin and what he did to the hog rider that no guards wanted to go close to him. So instead they had to place the cage at the top of the hole. So now Cage was trapped inside of a cage in the middle of the battlefield. So if a troop ever destroyed the cage, the new goblin brawler would be set free from his cage and rushed to the nearest enemy troop. Or if given enough time, the super strong goblin brawler would eventually break out of the cage and rush the nearest enemy anyways. And after the king witnessed this happen in the middle of a battle, he realized that he wanted the goblin brawler on his team. So he offered him a spot in his deck, and offered to pardon him for his crimes if he accepted it. So Cage figured that fighting in the arena was a better deal than living the rest of his life in prison, so he accepted the king's offer. And that there is the full story on how the Goblin Cage made it into the world of Clash. The hog rider is taken to the skies. Now not only can he hop over walls, but he can fly over them too. After nearly 2 years of waiting to see the hog rider on the builder's base, we are finally getting to see the hog rider in action. So 2 years after the world watched the hog rider discover the master builder and the builder base for the very first time, what took the hog rider so long to join the master builder's army? And how did pigs learn to fly? Find out all of that inside of today's story on how the hog rider became the hog glider. If you guys want to win one of two $25 gift cards, make sure to subscribe to my second channel called Variance Music and like this video. Winner will be drawn at the end of June, so make sure you do enter. And anyways, let's go ahead and get back into the video.
Wahoo! Land ho!
Nearly 2 years ago, the Hog Rider had for the very first time ever discovered the Master Builder on an abandoned island all by himself. How the Master Builder got there, we don't know, but I will be posting a story explaining the Master Builder's origin story very soon, along with his brand new builder bot named Otto, and how these two were brought into the world of Clash. So make sure you subscribe and check back for those stories because they are going to explain a lot of unanswered questions inside of Clash of Clans. Anyway, after the Hog Rider initially discovered the builder base, he had to quickly sail back to the Clash of Clans village to let everybody know about his new discovery. All the other troops went crazy and couldn't believe the news, and the village chief and heroes praised the Hog Rider for his discovery. The Hog Rider was treated like some kind of war hero, and he really liked it. He smiled to himself and then said quickly, "Come, and I'll show you." Unfortunately though, the chief and heroes couldn't go because they simply had to stay in the village in case it was attacked while they were gone, and some other troops were about to go and raid a base, so they couldn't come as well. So that meant that only the builders, villagers, a giant, minion, balloon, baby dragon, and Pekka could go with the hog. So they all began boarding onto the Hog Rider ship, well, all of the troops except for the barbarian. It looked as if somehow he missed the boat's ramp and instead accidentally ran into the ocean. The Hog Rider looked at the part of the ocean that he ran into and was waiting for him to pop back up, but for some reason he never did. So the Hog Rider just shrugged to himself and said, "Oh well," and then he undocked the boat and set sail. It was another long journey on the water, but eventually they made it back to the builder's base. They all unloaded off the boat and then met the Master Builder and began exploring the place. And just as they were finishing up, the barbarian came running out of the water, and turns out he ran all the way there and somehow ended up finding his way to the builder base. The troops didn't think too much of it and just shrugged it off. The troops visited the woods in the builder base and explored some other parts of the village as well, and they were in awe. Unfortunately though, their trip had to be cut short because they had already been gone from the village for long enough, and the other troops would probably start to get worried, and they also need to be used in the village to build stuff and raid. So the Hog Rider began gathering all the troops back at the boat, and got ready to set sail back home. It was a slightly tighter fit on the boat this time since the barbarian was tired and didn't want to run all the way back this time. So the troops all squeezed onto the boat and then undocked and set sail. Unexpectedly though, the boat began to quickly sink. The boat started to gain on water and boards on the boat started to fall out. It turned out that the ship was at its maximum capacity on the way to the builder's base, and once they added that one extra barbarian, it pushed past the maximum capacity and caused the ship to break. So as the ship continued to take on water and fall apart, the troops jumped overboard and were forced off. The boat did not make it very far off the coast of the builder's base, so the troops were able to walk back to the shore as shown in the loading screen here. The troops all finally got back to the shore where they willed themselves onto dry land. They all stood there soaking wet as parts of the boat began washing ashore. There were planks of wood, fabric used to make the sails, and even the Hog Rider's telescope. The troops all sat there shocked and scared as they now had no way of getting back home. The Hog Rider, who was the captain of the ship, decided to take charge. He asked the Master Builder if he would be able to rebuild a boat for them, but the Master Builder told the Hog that he didn't have any materials to spare, and unfortunately the only extra materials he had were the ones that just washed ashore from the shipwreck. The Master Builder said that he might be able to make something out of the materials from the shipwreck, but it would take him a while, since designing new buildings or inventions usually took a while to craft. In the meantime though, the Master Builder told the Hog that he is welcome to take his little rowboat back to the village, but unfortunately it only fits 2 troops, so just enough room for the Hog and his Hog Rider. He warned the Hog that it would take him a lot longer to get back to the village though, since it was a much tinier boat. So the Hog Rider and his Hog hopped into the little boat and they set sail back to the main village, while all the other troops stayed in the village. While the Hog Rider and his Hog were out at sea, the Master Builder made the other troops feel at home. And as days started to pass by, the troops got a bit bored, and so the Master Builder tried his best to make things a little interesting for them. And long story short, they became the Boxer Giant, the Beta Minion, the Super Pekka, and etc. All of these troop origin stories can be explained in future videos. And if you guys have one in particular that you guys want to see, then make sure you leave a comment down below suggesting a troop, and I will try and do that one as soon as possible. Anyway, the Hog Rider was out at sea for nearly a week before he finally made it back to the home village. And when he finally got to the village, he either needed to find a boat or bring some resources back to the builder base so that the Master Builder could rebuild them a boat himself. So firstly, the Hog Rider went to go ask the village chief and the builders if they had another boat or if the builders could build them a new one. Unfortunately though, the chief didn't have any other boats because the one that got destroyed was his only one. And the builders said that they'd love to build a new boat, but they wouldn't be able to because they were stuck doing upgrades for the next 14 days straight. So the Hog Rider had to think of another option. And then he remembered a time a few years ago when 2 barbarians stole a balloon and flew off to some faraway island. So the Hog Rider thought that he would be able to go ahead and give that a go. But instead of stealing the balloon, that he would simply ask the skeletons for it. So he asked the skeletons, but they ended up saying no. So the Hog Rider knocked them away and then stole the balloon anyways. He figured that he would just be able to take a few trips back and forth to bring all the troops back home. The Hog Rider sailed across the ocean, but this time in the air. He got back to the Builder Island in almost no time, but as soon as he got there, the Hog Rider realized that he had no idea on how to land this thing. So the balloon began sinking faster and faster until it hit the ground with a big thud. The Hog Rider and his hog walked out to the rubble and looked back to see the balloon completely destroyed and on fire. And as they stood there and watched it burn, as there was nothing they could do. The Hog Rider and the hog then turned around to see that all the other troops were looking at them. The Hog Rider looked at them and said, I guess we aren't going back to the home village anytime soon. But all the troops seemed to be okay with that, because they actually really liked it here on the Builder's base, and they didn't mind staying for a while. The Hog Rider felt awful though, and he needed to find a way back to the home village, but this time he didn't have the Master Builder's rowboat, so he had to think of something else. The Master Builder and the Hog Rider had to think a bit outside of the box to get back, and they ended up thinking that maybe they didn't need a boat, and maybe the Hog Rider could fly back instead. So together they went back to the pile of the shipwreck that washed back to shore, and the Master Builder said, so this is what we have to work with. So together they got to work, and in the end they ended up using the wood to create some sort of structure, and then they used these sails to create a wing, and together it formed some sort of hang glider. That was the best that they could do. The Hog Rider went to go quickly test it out, and he got up into the air and it was working, and he started sailing. He ended up sailing so far he found himself hovering over some other base. A defense ended up locking onto him and hit him with one shot. The Hog Rider ended up falling out of the sky and landing on some defense below him. The defense was stunned for a few seconds as it was processing what the heck just happened. Then to avoid dying while the defense was stunned, the Hog Rider mounted his hog, and as he usually does, and started swinging. He quickly wiped out the cannon and the archer tower, and ended up destroying the whole base. Turns out he only landed on top of a Builder Hall 3, so it wasn't too bad. When the Hog Rider finally found his way back to his base, he was pumping with excitement. He had never single-handedly taken out a base like that before. All the other troops gathered around him and cheered, and the Hog Rider had never felt so happy before. In fact, he liked it here so much more than back home, that he decided he might just stay on this base like the rest of the troops. Plus, he really liked this new act of flying, and he didn't want to tell the skeleton the bad news about his balloon. And so he did, and to this day, he fights alongside the Master Builder on the Builder's base as he swoops into villages and flies over their walls with his hang gliders before dropping down on unexpected defenses to wipe them out. And that there is the story on how the Hog Rider became the Hog Glider. A long overdue story video. The Master Builder is just like any other builder, except better in every way. He has some crazy inventions that make for some of the most powerful defensive structures in all of Clash, as well as some sort of different laboratory that turns regular troops into even more powerful versions of themselves. The Master Builder was recently discovered 2 years ago on an abandoned island by a Hog Rider who set sail on his ship, and until now the Master Builder was only able to upgrade a single defense on the regular base, and was rarely ever able to visit our home base. So in today's story, I'm going to explain why all of this is, and how the Master Builder was brought into the world of Clash. Also, before the video starts, if you want to enter my July giveaway for 2 winners of $50 each, then just like the video and then leave a comment down below. A long time ago, before the beginning of Clash of Clans, there were 6 dwarf brothers who were all born a few seconds apart from each other. Their names, in the order of youngest to oldest, were Bashful, Sleepy, Grumpy, Happy, Sneezy, and Bob. The 6 dwarves were born to be builders of the new Clash of Clans village. And since they were the only ones who could build stuff around the village, they were able to charge absurdly high prices in exchange for upgrades and buildings. For example, they would charge over 1 million gold just for a town hall upgrade, or close to 1 million elixir just for an army camp upgrade, where all he would do is put a carrot on top of a campfire. But unfortunately, the builders were the only ones who were capable of doing this at the time, so all the builders were fairly greedy and always charged the highest price possible that they could get away with, which was always a large majority of what the village had. But the villagers didn't hate the builders for this, they were just grateful that the builders were doing their job, regardless of the cost. Now the oldest of the brothers, who was Bob, was always a bit different from his brothers. As the oldest, he was a lot smarter than the rest of his brothers and took advantage of the rest of the builders. The older builder, Bob, always wanted to create a bunch of new defenses and buildings, but his other 5 brothers always voted against him, and since it was always a 5-to-1 vote, he couldn't do anything about it. It always seemed like the other 5 builders gained up against him. And since Bob the Builder wasn't able to create any of his own creations, and instead he had to build the predetermined defenses and buildings that the other 5 builders had agreed upon, he decided that he would just do something else. He decided that he would make sure that the required buildings were built or upgraded, but he himself would not be the ones doing it. He decided that he was going to build himself a little bot or a small assistant to do all of the building for him. So the master builder stayed up all night one night and built himself a fully functioning builder bot that would be able to do all of the hard work for him. And he was going to tell all the other villagers about it too. And then once he was done building his builder bot, he immediately put him to work to test it out. It worked just as he had intended. But then in the morning, before all of the villagers and troops were awake, the other 5 builders got up to get ready for their day of work, but then they did notice Bob's the builder's new builder bot. They immediately confronted Bob about this and they asked him what he was going to do with it. And Bob told them and was very straightforward about it and said that since he couldn't build his own special buildings and such, that he was just going to put them all out of business with his new builder bot, and he was going to give the village full access to his new builder bot. They told him that he couldn't use his builder bot because if the rest of the villagers found out about it, then they could use the builder bots to replace them, or even put them out of business. And Bob agreed, and he said, exactly what I want. They would no longer be able to charge such high prices for upgrades, and they might not even be able to compete with the bots since they would probably do it for free since they were robots. And they could work forever without sleeping or taking breaks. So they told Bob that he had to get rid of it, but Bob refused. He was already pretty mad that he couldn't use any of his cool, unique creations, so there was no way in heck that they were going to let him take away his little builder bot. He even aggressively told them that they could go screw themselves, and that they're all going to lose their jobs because of this. And since the builders weren't exactly the fighting types of troops, they couldn't physically take it away from the master builder, at least while he was there. And even if they could take it away while he wasn't there, he would just be able to make a new one since there was pretty much unlimited resources around them on the Clash of Clans base. So the 5 other builders had to think of something different, and they had to think of it quick, before the rest of the troops woke up. They had to get rid of the builder bot and Bob the Builder before all the other troops woke up and found out about it. So they went over to the wizard's tower and woke him up from his sleep. While the wizard was still waking up and getting over the shock of 5 dwarves standing over his bed, they asked him if he could make them a sleeping potion. They then each offered part of their savings, which was a lot since they were charging such high prices for their upgrades, that they had fortunes and fortunes to offer the wizard. In total, they offered the wizard so much gold that he couldn't say no. He then whipped up a sleeping potion and then gave it to the builders in exchange for the gold. He didn't ask any other questions about what they were going to use it for since he was just focused on the gold. The builders then took it, and then after he gave the builders the sleeping potion, he quickly took a swig of it himself and then went right back to bed. The 5 builders then went back to the Bob the Builder and told him that he looked thirsty, and offered him something to drink. Bob innocently said yes please, and then he was unknowingly handed the sleeping potion. Instead of taking a quick sip though, he chugged the whole bottle. Turned out he was dying of thirst and hadn't had anything to drink all night. So right after chugging the whole bottle, he immediately passed out. The 5 builders then dragged him over to the water, and together they all quickly built a boat. In no time they finished the boat since they were all working on it together, and then they loaded the builder onto the boat. They then went back to go grab the builder bot who was just sitting there. They loaded the builder bot onto the boat with the builder, and then Happy volunteered to take them away. So Happy boarded the boat and then set off for sail. He took them to an island decently far away and then unloaded them. He then reprogrammed the builder bot to build a few key structures for Bob when he woke up. So Happy programmed the builder bot and then took the boat back to the home base. And once he got back, he hid the boat in some cave and then went back to the village. When he got back, all the other troops were still asleep. Happy then went and found the other builders and told them what had happened. He dropped them off, had the builder bot build some necessary buildings for Bob and the builder bot when he woke up, and that Bob should be waking up anytime soon. And then the rest of the builders went back to work as if everything was normal. They even gifted the boat to the village chief just to be on his good side. And for the longest time, no one ever seemed to notice that a builder was missing. In fact, everyone got so used to the fact that there was only 5 builders that it was as if there was never even a 6th builder. So life went on per usual for many years at the home village. Meanwhile, over at the other island, Bob the Builder never seemed to wake up, considering he drank an entire bottle of the sleeping potion. Usually that would be enough to knock out an entire army for a day. But Bob ended up laying there, while his little builder bot built a builder hall, a clock tower, a laboratory, all in anticipation for when the builder finally woke up. But Bob just kept sleeping. Days went by at first, and then weeks, and eventually years went by. But by this point, the builder's bot's battery ended up dying and ended up falling over right next to Bob the Builder. Then finally, a few years later, in the summer of 2016, the sleeping potion finally wore off and Bob woke up. And when he woke up, he noticed that there was some sort of builder hall there, and a research lab, and some giant clock building for some reason. But they were all completely destroyed for some reason. It turned out that while he had been sleeping for so long, that all the buildings that the builder bot had completed eroded and had been torn down. And then Bob looked down beside him, and he saw that his little builder bot had completely passed out. He quickly assumed that his battery must have died, and judging by the length of his beard, he assumed that he had been sleeping for a long time. So since Bob had no idea where he was or any idea how he got there, he decided that he may as well start making himself as comfortable as possible. So he got to work repairing his builder hall and repairing all the other broken buildings around his base. And then lucky for Bob, a few days after he woke up, he saw a boat crash on the shores of his island. And from the rubble, he saw a hog rider and his hog. And that there was the beginning of the builder base, where Bob was able to start creating whatever sort of creative defenses he could think of, and where he had access to other unique troops like the Rage Barbarian, the Sneaky Archer, whose stories you can check out. I'll have them linked in the description or by clicking the eye in the top right of the corner. But Bob actually ended up liking it so much at his new island that even though the hog rider was able to show him the way back home, Bob didn't want to leave. In fact, in his new village, he was the boss. He referred to himself as the best builder and even called himself the master builder. He even later created himself a sick battle machine so that he could even join in on some of the fights, so not only would he be a builder, but he would also be a fighting troop. And that there is the story on how the Master Builder was introduced into the world of Clash. Make sure to watch part 1 of this story before watching this video. I'll have it linked down below, or you can click the top right of the screen right now. Recently in Clash of Clans, the Master Builder has gained a new automated friend who looks like he's going to do all of the Master Builder's tasks for him. And with all this newfound free time, the Master Builder is planning on visiting the regular base plenty more. But now instead of taking his rowboat, he's going to ride a barbarian all the way between the two bases on his underwater taxi service. So why did the Master Builder wait until now to build himself an automated builder friend? And why did the Master Builder wait until now to join the other builders in the home village? Find out all of that inside of today's story, the Otto's origin story. So for nearly 2 years, the Master Builder enjoyed his time on his small island. He got to create many powerful defenses like the Crusher, the Roaster, the Mega Tesla, and many more. He even got to encounter many super powerful new troops like the Boxer Giant, the Super Pekka, and even other troops like the Hog Glider. He didn't have anyone telling him what he could and couldn't build here. It was pretty great. Although being stuck on his own little island did take its toll on the Master Builder. He was getting really tired of always being around the same troops all the time. He was getting especially mad that the Barbarian was always angry and constantly destroying things for no apparent reason, and the Sneaky Archer who was always being super creepy by lurking in the shadows and creeping up on him, and the fact that the Super Pekka was constantly leaking radioactivity from its armor, and that there was a risk that any moment it could blow up him and the rest of the base at any given moment. So the Master Builder really needed a break. So one day he decided to craft a tiny little rowboat out of some spare materials that he had gotten from a shipwreck that had happened a long time ago. Long after the shipwreck, there was still debris that was washing up on shore, which was too bad because the Hog Rider could have really used all those materials a long time ago to get back to his home village. But nonetheless, everything worked out for the Hog Rider, and the Master Builder was able to craft himself another little rowboat. Unfortunately though, the raft was only big enough to support one person. And so the Master Builder set sail to go visit the home base, by using a map that the Hog Rider had drew from his memory. It was a long journey back to the home village, but he eventually made it. The Master Builder went and met his fellow builders, and when the other builders saw him, they expected him to be super mad, but instead, the Master Builder decided to forgive them. He told them that he actually liked his life on his own little island a lot since he could make whatever he wanted with no one in charge of him. But he did say that he was getting lonely over there, and wished he could come back here and work with his fellow builders every now and then. The other builders obviously didn't want him back and messing up their buildings because that was literally why they kicked him out of their base in the first place. But since they saw that he was feeling apologetic and humbled, they decided to give him a chance. But the builder first had to get permission from the Barbarian King and Queen since they pretty much ran the village. The builders were expecting to have to answer a lot of questions about who this new builder was and why there was 6 of them now, but instead, when they met the King and Queen, the builders asked if it was alright that their friend, the Master Builder, helped out around the village a little bit. And the King and Queen didn't even look at the builders, and they just simply said, yeah, sure, whatever, I don't care. So the builders looked at each other and were wondering what the heck just happened, but since they got a yes, they decided to just leave before they started asking any more questions or changing their minds. So the builders went to go tell Bob the good news, and Bob was ecstatic and couldn't wait to show the builders some of his new creations. But to burst his bubble, the other builders weren't as excited. They told him that they didn't want him changing or adding a bunch of new defenses because they worked really hard on all of the ones they already have. The master builder's energy quickly dialed down slightly after hearing that. And then the master builder then looked around and saw countless numbers of defenses. He counted 7 or 8 cannons and then like 8 or 9 archer towers and 4 mortars, 4 wizard towers. There was a ton of defenses. He then said to the builders that there were so many of each defense, would it really matter that much if he just upgraded one of those defenses? And then he promised, I won't do anything different to them, I swear, I'll just upgrade it just like you guys would. The builders got into a small huddle and quickly had a debate. And then they went back over to the master builder and then they told him, fine, you can upgrade 1 cannon, and they will decide based off of that. The master builder smiled and said, great, and then he walked over to the closest cannon and immediately got to work. He worked on it for days, and when he finally finished, the other builders came over to take a quick look. It took them a millisecond to realize that the cannon he had upgraded was not a regular cannon. Somehow the master builder literally combined 2 cannons into one, and made some sort of double cannon. So the builders went over to the master builder who was sitting there, exhausted from upgrading the cannon for a few days straight. The builders looked at him and asked, what the heck was that? The master builder looked up, acting all confused, and then replied with, what do you mean? So the builders clarified by telling him, you promised that you would upgrade it just like we would. The master builder, who was still confused, looked behind him to see that the cannon he had just upgraded was in fact no regular cannon. He looked it up and down from the ground up and said out loud, ah crap, not again. And then he explained to the builders that he was just so used to upgrading his cannons as double cannons that he must have accidentally turned the cannon into a double cannon. He apologized a ton and then said that it would never happen again. But the builders weren't having it. They said that he wasn't going to get a second chance, and then they sent him back on his rowboat and he went back to his builder base. The master builder was really sad that he had got kicked out not only once, but twice. So he sailed back to his builder base and went back to work as he usually did. He kept telling himself that he didn't even really want to go back to the home base, and that he was happier here by himself. But that wasn't really the case. So the master builder went back to his everyday life for a while, and kept pretending. But then, a month or 2 later, the master builder started to get annoyed by the rage barbarian when he kept smashing his buildings whenever he had a little temper tantrum, and then when the boxer giants would practice on his own defenses. The master builder had had enough once again, and needed a break, so he set sail back to the home village. And when he got there, he begged and pleaded for a second chance. The builders were all hesitant about it, but they thought that the master builder seemed genuine about his apology, and that he would listen this time around. So they decided to give him a second chance. But this time, just to make sure that they didn't have a repeat of last time, they let him upgrade an archer tower instead, because they figured there's no way he could mess up a simple archer tower, right? So for the next few days, he worked on the archer tower, and when he was finished, the other builders came over to look at it. And when they saw it, they were shockingly pleased to see that the master builder actually listened to them. And when they went to go say thank you to the master builder for listening, they saw that the archer tower just shrunk. It looked like the archer tower sunk into the ground and was about half the height of a regular tower. The builders then looked over at the master builder and looked at him in disgust, and then told him to leave. So once again, the master builder was sent back to his builder base. Then a few months later, the master builder was getting bored and annoyed on his builder base. So once again, he set sail for the home base. And once again, he gave them a long apology and then begged and pleaded, and once again the builders gave in. But this time they told him, we don't trust you with our cannons or archer towers, so you can have one last try on our least favorite defense that we rarely ever use, the mortar. So once again the master builder got to work, and started upgrading the mortar. And a few days later he finished the mortar and the builders came over to check on it. This time it wasn't as subtle. There was straight up 3 mortars all jammed into one, and the builders all looked over at each other, and then told the master builder that this was the last straw and he was never allowed back at the home village ever again. So again, the master builder sailed back to his builder base. Then a few months later, once he got bored again, he sailed over to the home base, but this time when he got there, the builders all immediately told him to screw off, and that he was out of free chances, he was never allowed back, and then they told him that if he ever came back, the wizard was instructed to burn his little rowboat. So this time the master builder went back to his builder base. He was extremely sad and upset since this likely meant that he would be trapped on this island forever. So for a long time he stayed on his little builder island, with no chance of ever going back. Until one day he received a note from a barbarian. The note wrote that they were getting super swamped back at the main village and they really needed the extra hands. They wished they could get the other troops to help out, but it turned out that the witch, the giant, the barbarian, and the hog were all incompetent at building things, so they really needed Bob's help. The note continued to say that they would need this help for an extended period of time since there was just a brand new update that came out with a lot of new stuff to upgrade. So they suggested that he got someone to take over his base while he was gone. So the builder quickly looked around his village seeing who would take his spot, but after a quick look, it became evident to him that none of the troops were going to be capable of replacing him. So instead, he resorted to building his own builder assistant. So he decided to go back to his builder hall and pick up his old friend, the builder bot that had originally got him sent off his base. He had never rebuilt it since he never had the materials to do so. So he quickly had to find some materials. But unfortunately, he had just upgraded his builder hall to builder hall 9 and he was completely out of materials. So he had nothing to upgrade his builder bot with. But then he looked over at his rowboat and realized that he used all of his extra materials from the shipwreck to build that rowboat. And then he figured that he had no use for that rowboat anymore, so he could just destroy it, since any time that the wizard would see that rowboat, he was instructed to destroy it. So he used the wood from the old rowboat to make the bot. He then grabbed a wheel from a broken cannon cart and attached that as its legs. Next, he attached some of his old tools to be used as the bot's hands, and then he used the Hog Rider's telescope, which was from the shipwreck from a long time ago, and he used that to be the builder bot's eye. And last but not least, he grabbed an antenna that he placed on top of its head that he could use to communicate with it. So after he finished putting it all together, he had to test it out. But then he realized that he didn't know what to call his bot. So he decided to be super unimaginative about it and name it the official time-saving titanium occupant, or for short, Otto. So he then asked Otto to build him something, and then the Autobot quickly zoomed off to build something, as if he had been waiting for this moment for years and years. Which in fact he had, since he was just laying around in the Master Builder's builder hall for a few years. The Master Builder wasn't the only one impressed by all of the Builderbot's work. All of the troops came over to watch their new little Builderbot work his magic. And while all the troops were watching, the Master Builder hopped onto the barbarian's back and they made their way back to the home village. And that takes us to where we are now, where the Master Builder will be able to permanently stay in the home village as long as he would like. But only time will tell if he has learned his lesson about gearing up defenses, and if he will abide by the other builders' rules. And that there is the Master Builder's story, and the origin of how the Autobot was brought into the world of Clash. Brawl Stars is the newest Supercell game release, and has actually been out for a year and a half. As I've shown in a previous video, which you can watch by clicking the top right corner, Clash Royale, Clash of Clans, and Brawl Stars are all in the same Clash universe. In case some of you guys don't believe me, you can check out that video for yourself. So in today's story, I'll explain how I think a builder from Clash of Clans created the brand new Brawl Stars game within the world of Clash. Back in June 2017, the builder from Clash of Clans had just finished upgrading the final archer tower in the village. For the past 5 years, he had been working tirelessly, and since he had no upgrades left to do for now, he decided that he deserved a bit of a break. The builder was beginning to feel a bit bored of doing the same thing over and over again in the Clash of Clans village, and was longing to try something new. However, without any idea of what that new thing he wanted to do was, he decided to go to the Clash Royale arena like he usually does. But after spending his free time there for so many years, he too was getting a little bored of watching Clash Royale battles. Even though they sometimes switched up the battles, like having 2 vs 2s or battles where the entire field was covered in rage spells, it still got repetitive after a while. For almost 2 years, he was watching the same old Red King battle against his rival the Blue King, every single day. The builder was tired of it, but unfortunately, he was stuck here just like the rest of the troops. He had responsibilities in the Clash of Clans village, and his only other source of entertainment was at the Clash Royale arena. So one day in the middle of June 2017, he was just finishing up watching a battle in the arena, and as he got up to leave back to the Clash of Clans village, he walked by the training camp arena. The training arena was often used for practice battles and occasionally used for tournament battles when the other arenas were in use. But the training arena also had another hidden use that many players didn't actually know about. Whenever a new troop is created and expected to be added to the Clash Royale League, the Kings test out these new troops in the training arena to see if they would be a good fit in real battles. Often these troops are accepted into the arena and end up helping crush their opponents. Take the Royal Recruits or the Electro Dragon or even the Goblin Giant for example. They all started out in the training arena where they impressed the Kings and were eventually added to the real battles. Despite the great success new troops often have in the training camp arena, there are however many troops who do not quite impress the King as much. These troops who do not impress the Kings as much are not added to the regular battles, and many people have never even heard of them. The Kings have their own reasons as to why they don't like each and every troop, It can be as simple as the troop just isn't powerful enough, or it is too much like another troop, or any other reason that the kings may think of. When the troop is determined not to be added to the real battles, the kings order those troops to be destroyed and turned back into elixir. These troops that are set to be destroyed are sent to the bone pit arena, where they are set to be executed by the executioner himself. Anyway, as the builder was leaving, he saw the executioner exiting the training camp arena, and with him was a troop that the builder had never seen in his life before. Since the builder was already super bored from all the repetitiveness, he was super intrigued to see something out of the ordinary. Just wanting to do something new, he went over to the executioner and new troop to see what was up. He went up to them and asked where they were going. Seeing no problem with it, the executioner told him he was taking the new troop to the bone pit arena to be executed. He thought there was nothing wrong with this. As it was something that he always does, and it was just part of his normal day life. The builder was super shocked and confused, as this was the first he was hearing about the king's dark secret. But immediately he knew how wrong it was, and he wanted to help the troop. He asked the executioner what it would take for him to let her go right now, and he said that the kings were usually paying him about 500 gold to do this. The builder asked him, "What if I gave you 5,000 gold instead to let this troop come with me?" The executioner easily agreed with that, since he was only in it for the money, and then the builder gave the executioner 5,000 worth of gold, and the executioner handed over the troop and then went on his way. The builder was pleasantly surprised, as it only cost him 5,000 gold, even though that's considered a decent amount of gold in Clash Royale. However, in Clash of Clans, 5,000 gold is almost nothing, and the builder was able to get that much from a max gold mine in a bit more than a single hour. And after the executioner was out of sight, the builder turned to the troop and asked for her name. The unknown troop looked at the builder and replied, "My name's Shelly." So the builder introduced himself and told Shelly that he was the builder from Clash of Clans. Shelly didn't really seem to understand exactly what that meant, but she nodded in acknowledgement. The builder then asked why she was set to be executed, and she told him that the kings didn't like her. Even though she could hold her own in battles and was strong enough, the kings told her that she was too similar to a troop that was already in the Clash Royale League. Apparently he was called something like the Hunter, or something like that. The builder asked to see her attack, and she shot her musket. The builder could easily see the resemblance to the Hunter, however it was slightly different, as it was a bit more of a concentrated blast. Nonetheless though, the builder wondered to himself how many other good troops like Shelly were there. So he went to go confront the kings. He asked the kings how many other troops like Shelly there were. The kings explained that there weren't any right now, since they had all already been executed, but they did have a big bunch of other troops that aren't looking so great right now that are likely to be sent down the same path. So the builder then offered the kings a deal. Since the reason the kings sent troops to be executed was that they had no use for them, and then they also got a bit of elixir back from it, the builder offered them a counter deal that would null both of those incentives. The offer was as follows. The builder would give the kings a couple thousand gold every time they released a troop to the builder, rather than have them be executed. And being the gold hungry and greedy kings that they were, they accepted the deal. Now that the builder had saved all these troops from an unjust execution, now he just had to figure out what he was going to do with them. They obviously weren't going to be accepted into the Clash Royale arenas, since literally just moments ago they were literally just about to execute them. And when he asked the village chief about bringing them back to Clash of Clans, he was shut down, as the chief just didn't have enough space in the barracks or army camps for all those troops. So the builder was in a bit of a pickle. He had nowhere to take these troops. The builder, followed by all the rejected troops, kept walking around while the builder was trying to think of what to do next. And as they were walking, the builder passed by a brand new arena in Clash Royale that was under construction. The arena looked like it had a long time before it was ever going to be ready, but that wasn't the point. By seeing this new arena under construction, it gave the builder an idea that could solve both of his problems of being bored and also what to do with all of these troops. So just like that, the builder went back to the Clash of Clans village really quickly, and with the help of the rejected troops, they borrowed a bunch of resources while the builder grabbed his building tools from his builder hut. The builder then took those tools and the rejected troops to a new location that was decently close to the Clash Royale arena. The builder built an entirely new stadium, far different from the Clash Royale arena, as it had many obstacles and no kings or princess towers. Since all the rejected troops were all born to fight, the builder created another stadium for them to battle within. Except this time, no king would be in charge of telling them if they were good enough to battle, or tell them what to do. Each troop would be the boss of him or herself, and they would be free to do whatever they wanted. And in the builder's new league/game, the troops were separated into different teams each battle in a 3 vs 3 fashion. To help the rejected troops get used to this new battle style, the builder also created a bunch of robots that the troops could practice against. He created one robot that had a laser gun attached to his arm, and then another one which was called a macho giant that had boxing gloves instead of hands. Creating these were a piece of cake, as they were basically a Walmart version of the pekka that he had created a long time ago back in Clash of Clans. After the troops got used to the new system against the robots, the builder had them practice against each other for about a year and a half. To be exact, from June 14th, 2017 all the way to December 12th, 2018. The builder really wanted to make sure that the whole system and all the troops were experienced and comfortable with his new game mode. And he needed to make sure that when he did announce his game, which he called Brawl Stars, to the entire world, he wanted to make sure that they were all impressed and that he could hopefully compete against the kings in Clash Royale. And not until December 12th did he feel that there was nothing more that he could do. So when he went to go announce the grand opening of his new stadium for Brawl Stars on December 12th, he brought 3 of his most powerful brawlers with him to help promote it. At the time, the strongest of his brawlers were known as Shelly, Bo, and El Primo. He brought Shelly and Bo to the Clash Royale arenas, where they wound up fighting against all the other troops in regular battles, to show them just how powerful they were and that Brawl Stars could be equally challenging. And they competed really well actually, as they had grown much stronger while practicing in the Brawl Stars arena. And a day after Shelly and Bo were brought to Clash Royale, El Primo made his way to the Clash of Clans village, where he was welcomed into the armies, since the chief was in need of a tanky defense targeting troop such as himself, since the regular giants just weren't doing so hot at the time. So El Primo helped the village claim many victories, and in the end they were impressed and happy to see him. It was official. All the troops and villagers in both Clash of Clans and Clash Royale were very impressed with the new brawlers, and were intrigued to see what this new so-called Brawl Stars game was all about. And that right there is the story of how Brawl Stars was created by the builder. One of everyone's favorite troops in Clash of Clans and Clash Royale is a powerful and humorous character who just so happens to also be able to incinerate troops with his fireballs. So although he is a fan favorite with his magic tricks, he is also someone that his enemies fear deeply. So this formidable troop is truly a legend in the Clash world. But the big question right now is, who the heck is this new wizard who has an obsession with partying all the time? Find out in my story on the Party Wizard's origin story. So, a long time ago, the wizard had multiple brothers, many of whom went on to do amazing things, such as the ice wizard who learned to control ice and snow, and the electro wizard who learned to harness the power of electricity, and himself of course who could summon massive fireballs. But the one brother that no one ever talks about is his brother named Chad. No one has ever heard of Chad until now, but for good reason, and that's because he's never been around and has an unhealthy obsession with partying. As the youngest wizard in the family, he felt that he could never live up to his family's expectations of him, especially when his older brothers were out there controlling fire, ice, and electricity. And so because of this, he decided to at least enjoy himself all the time by partying. His parents even tried to help him become more powerful like his brothers by helping teach him powerful spells. At one point, they even wrote down on a piece of paper one of the most powerful fireball spells ever. But Chad just crumpled up the paper and shoved it into his pocket like he didn't care. He ended up falling so much in love with dancing and listening to music, so much that in fact he wanted to move away to a place that had parties way more often than the Clash of Clans village. And so just like the builder did a while back, Chad decided to leave the Clash of Clans village and go to join the real world, where there was always a party happening somewhere. He ended up staying in the real world for a really long time, and he had no intentions at all of coming back to the Clash of Clans village. Well, at least not until he found out that Clash of Clans was actually throwing their own huge party for their 6-year anniversary. When he heard that big news, he thought to himself that this could be one of the parties of the year, and there was no way that he could miss it. And so the party wizard began making his way back to the Clash of Clans village. But Chad had been away from the village for so long that he forgot exactly how to get back home. And so for a long time he wandered around until finally many days later he got lucky and found the Clash of Clans village by chance. But when he finally did get back, it was too late. The 6-year anniversary party was over and he had missed the biggest party of the year. Chad was pretty upset by this and was getting ready to go back to the real world to make up for all the partying he missed, but before he could leave, his brother the wizard ran up behind him and yelled stop. Chad turned to look at him and then the wizard said to Chad, "You look exhausted, you've been gone for so long. Just come stay one night with me and then you can leave in the morning." So Chad decided to take him up on it. He stayed the night with the wizard inside of his wizard tower. But when the wizard finally woke up, he woke up to screaming and yelling and the sounds of cannonballs flying through the air. Apparently the village was being attacked. The wizard poked his head out of the small door and saw that there were barbarians running everywhere, giants smashing buildings, and hog riders singing terribly.
Now you got me.
The wizard just sat back and watched from the tower as all the fighting went down. He then watched his brother and the other wizard towers shoot at all the attacking troops and watched them take out all of the enemies. Then when the battle was finally done, Chad watched as the rest of the village cheered and congratulated the wizards on their work. The wizards were basically like heroes here. And when they were finally done celebrating, Chad went over to his brother and asked him to teach him how to defend the village just like he did. He wanted to be a hero and be celebrated just as much as them. His brother looked at him and told him that if he was going to do that, then he would need him to give up his partying for good. And Chad agreed to do that. He thought it was finally time to do something more productive and helpful, and so he locked his party outfit away in a closet and locked it away. And then after that, his brother began showing him the ropes of running his own wizard tower. And Chad did an amazing job. It was almost like he was born to do this. He was just as good as the rest of the wizard towers and was doing extremely well, and for the whole time he didn't even think about partying once. But then, a little less than a year later, the village announced that they were going to be celebrating their 7-year anniversary with a huge party. And at first, Chad tried to resist the urge of going back to this party. But he was only holding on by a thread, because this was a similar party to the exact party that he missed a year ago. So he really wanted to go to this one, but alas, he refused to go. But since he was only holding on by a thread, once his magic rabbit opened up his locked cabinet with his party outfit, he just lost it and went back to his old ways. He went full out party mode at the 7-year anniversary, but at least on the bright side, he still did care about the village. So he wanted to keep defending it even though he still liked partying. But the village chief wouldn't let him. He said that with his partying habit, he couldn't trust him to repeatedly show up for his job. For example, what if he was too busy partying one night and didn't wake up in time the next day while the village was being attacked? So Chad was unable to defend the village anymore. But there was nothing stopping him from attacking. So he joined the Clash army. And while he was waiting to attack by the army camp, he reached into his pocket and found some scrunched up piece of paper. He looked at it and noticed that it was some super powerful spell that his parents had written down for him a long time ago. And so the next battle, he ended up testing that spell out. And it did way more damage than his regular fireball. With this new fireball, he found a special niche inside of the army and found that he was even more powerful than the wizard himself, although he did have less health only because his outfit didn't provide as much protection as the other wizards. And so for the next month, the party wizard stayed in the Clash of Clans village and partied hard while also helping them attack on offense. But alas, only time will see if this will be the last that we see of the party wizard. And that there is the story of the party wizard's backstory. Stay tuned for some live attacks if you guys want to stick around for that. The Grand Warden is the newest and most recent hero added into the Clash of Clans village. Being the only support hero, he has become a staple in every single Town Hall 11 and Town Hall 12 army, with his Ring of Immunity. And for many years, he has been the exact same strong, powerful, and wise Grand Warden that he always was. But at the beginning of this month, the Grand Warden underwent a serious change, and more importantly, a serious new makeover, where he transformed from the good old wise Grand Warden into the new Party Warden who carries a massive boombox everywhere he goes on top of his shoulders. So in today's story, I'm gonna go ahead and give you guys my version of how the Grand Warden became the reckless Party Warden. So for nearly 4 years, the Grand Warden has been roaming around our villages, sharing his wealth of wisdom to all of the new troops. He has been around for a very long time, and during that very long time, the Grand Warden hasn't changed a whole lot. In fact, the only changing he has done in the last 4 years is from his regular self into the stone statue he becomes on defense. But other than that, he has remained the exact same over the years. And one day, some of the troops noticed this as well, where they would see the Grand Warden go through the exact same routine every single day, where he would wake up, attack, defend, and then go back to bed. He would never go around socializing with the other troops or go to the village bar after attacks, or even take part in the village debates and politics, despite being looked up to by all of the troops. So one day, a group of troops came over to see the Grand Warden. They had to knock on a stone statue to get his attention first though. So the barbarian went ahead, knocked on the statue, and then the statue poofed into the Grand Warden. Even after seeing it happen so many times before, the troops still got a little startled and took a quick step back. But then they gathered their wits, or lack thereof in the case of the barbarian, and asked the Grand Warden if he wanted to come watch some Clash Royale battles with them, since he wasn't really doing anything anyways. At first the Grand Warden thanked them for the invite but then refused. But to that, the archer insisted that the Grand Warden come. Her invite came off a little more hostile than she was hoping for, but it seemed to get the job done, so it worked out anyways. So without really having too much of a choice, the Grand Warden accompanied the rest of the troops to the Clash Royale arenas. And once he got there, the troops found their way to their seats, and the Grand Warden followed them. They all sat down, and the Grand Warden started to watch his very first Clash Royale battle ever. He found it intriguing, but it wasn't quite something he would go to see on his own anytime soon. But since he was dragged there, he sat through all of the battles and tried to enjoy it. Once the battles were all done, the archer said that they were going to have some sort of fair down on the ground level, so the troops and them all took off to go take part in that. And as the Grand Warden was getting up from his seat to join them, he saw that one of the kings was coming over to him. The king greeted the Grand Warden and told him that he was heard a lot about him, and it was a pleasure to have him at the Clash Royale arenas. The king then asked the Grand Warden if he'd like to come with him to his little castle. The Grand Warden didn't really have anything better to do, and so he accepted the invite and followed the king to his tower. Once they got to the king's tower, they went to his family room, and the king sat down in his big chair and turned the TV on. The TV was just playing on in the background as the king started up a conversation, and the two chatted for a while. The conversation wasn't too important, but about an hour later, the king looked at his clock and said, "Oh shoot, I have more battles starting soon, I've got to go. But please do feel free to stay and make yourself at home." And so the Grand Warden decided to sit down and try watching some of this crazy TV thing that the king was watching. The Grand Warden had never seen TV before, but he was extremely intrigued by what was happening on the screen. It looked like it was some sort of musical with a bunch of people singing. The Grand Warden really liked what he was hearing, and so he stayed for a bit longer and just listened to the songs and watched the performances. And in fact, he even went and sat in the king's chair. The music he was listening to was so different from the ones that he was used to hearing, and they were so much better, especially comparing it to the Hog Rider singing. God, that was awful. But alas, it was time for him to go back to the Clash of Clans village, and once he got back, he couldn't stop thinking about the music he had heard. And so he wanted to go to find some of that music in person. So he went to none other than the builder to ask him how exactly he got to the real world. The builder then told the Grand Warden exactly how, through using the spring trap and the baby dragon to get back. And then so, the Grand Warden listened to all of his instructions and then took off to the real world following all of those steps. The Grand Warden was on a mission to find more of that music. He ended up finding some sort of music shop on some street, where he found a gold chain, a microphone, sunglasses, a new outfit, and most importantly, a boombox, all inside the same shop. And since he wasn't from there, he had no idea that he had to pay, and so he left the store without paying. But obviously the cashier ended up calling the cops on him, and the cops came rushing in. But when the cops did try and get him, the Grand Warden just walked right by them. And so when the cops threatened to shoot the Grand Warden, and the Grand Warden didn't listen, they began firing away. But that didn't faze the Grand Warden, as he just popped his Eternal Tomb ability and just walked right by them without even being touched. He then ended up finding his way back to the Clash of Clans village with all of his new stuff. He didn't even need the help of a baby dragon since he was able to fly. And now that he had this new boombox, he was constantly playing all of his new favorite songs everywhere he went. No matter where he went, he was playing music, and even when attacking. But the troops didn't seem to mind. In fact, it actually seemed to help them, as when they were in the circle of the music radius, they actually seemed to gain more health. So it worked out the best for everyone. And that there is the story of how the Grand Warden became the now hip and cool party warden. The Barbarian King has already gone through many changes, whether it be by leveling up and becoming stronger than ever before, or whether it be something more major like becoming a champion gladiator fighter, or becoming the king of the pekkas. But despite all those major changes, he has not yet been through a change as major as the most recent one, where the immortal Barbarian King died and became the Skeleton King. So stay tuned for today's story that will go over the Skeleton King's origin story. But 4 years? 5 years? How long has it been since the Barbarian King has been roaming around the Clash of Clans village? Doing the same old job of attacking and defending villages. The Barbarian King definitely has a good reason to be feeling bored, as he does nearly the same thing every single day. And it's for that reason that the Barbarian King absolutely loves special events and holidays, because during those events, new things happen and the Barbarian King and all the other troops get to experience a load of new things and get to have a bit of a different experience than their normal everyday lives. And so very recently, the Barbarian King was feeling even more bored than usual. He was pretty much just counting down the days until the next fun event, which just so happened to be Halloween. But Halloween was almost a whole month away, and the Barbarian King was a little distraught from that. But then the other day, the Barbarian King overheard a rumor of a brand new Halloween-themed arena in Clash Royale. It was the very first piece of new event news that the Barbarian King had overheard, and he was extremely intrigued. He tried to find out more about the new Halloween-themed arena, and he found out that apparently a new secret limited edition arena was going to be getting released soon in Clash Royale. The Barbarian King was so excited, and the fact that the arena wasn't actually released yet made it even more exciting for him, because it was a bit of a mystery and a surprise. So the Barbarian King thought that it would be a fun way to kill time to go and look for the new hidden Halloween arena and be the very first person to ever find it. Nothing much was happening in the Clash of Clans village right now anyways, so he left to go search for the Halloween arena. The Barbarian King traveled to the Clash Royale lands, and once he passed over the border he had to be much more careful, since now that he was no longer in the Clash of Clans lands, that meant that if ever he died, he wouldn't be able to respawn like he usually does, and he would be dead fully. So that meant that he was no longer immortal and had to be very careful. The Barb King searched for a long time before coming across a murky and dark looking swamp. It looked super spooky and the Barbarian King thought that he was on the right track. He then poked his head through a clearing in the trees and his eyes widened as he found himself staring at the brand new Halloween themed arena in Clash Royale. He was going to be the very first troop to ever set foot on it, and so he began walking over to the field area to go do it. But just as he was about to take his very first step on the new Halloween arena, he heard a loud roaring or growling sound. He looked to the right of him and saw a massive glowing purple golem staring directly at him with his piercing eyes. The purple golem looked extremely angry and was ready to attack as if the Barbarian King was trespassing on his property. The Barbarian King assumed that the new purple golem must be guarding the new arena, but despite the piercing eyes of the purple golem and the massive size of it, it didn't scare the Barbarian King. The Barbarian King was itching for a new and exciting fight, especially against a new troop like this that he had never fought before. And so the Barbarian King drew his sword and charged the purple golem. The Barb King took a quick slice and chopped off the golem's arm and then quickly went in for the finishing blow. The golem exploded and then the Barbarian King turned around to walk away. But little did he know that the purple golem didn't die, it just split into two smaller golems. So as the king was walking over to check out the rest of the new Halloween arena, the purple golemites ran up behind the Barbarian King and smacked him on the back of his head. The king then passed out and fell straight into the green river flowing between the arenas. The king then began floating downstream. Later, as the royal ghost was heading back to his castle after a long day of battles, he came across the Barbarian King laying at the side of a riverbank. The royal ghost went over to the king and noticed that the king wasn't breathing. The king was dead. The royal ghost luckily knew a thing or two about being dead, and so with the help of some of his ghostly powers, a small bit of a skeleton spell, and a haste spell to speed up the process, the royal ghost was able to resurrect the Barbarian King. Unfortunately though, the royal ghost was no necromancer or witch, and probably should have went and gotten the witch or the wizards to help him. And so when he did resurrect the Barbarian King, he didn't fully bring him back. The Barbarian King was still his same old self, except for the fact that he just looked a bit different. And by a bit different, I mean very different. The Barbarian King was literally a walking skeleton now. Although he was still just as strong and just as smart as he was before, he just lacked muscles and a skin to show for it. Which was a little creepy, but the Barbarian King thought it looked awesome, and it also saved him time of having to go buy a Halloween costume this year. So anyway, once the Barbarian King regained consciousness, the new Skeleton King tried to get up, but he quickly stumbled. The royal ghost quickly explained to the Skeleton King that it may take some time getting used to before he can be back to his normal strength. And so the royal ghost offered to take the Skeleton King home and help him adjust, since he had gone through the same thing on his own. So together, the royal ghost and the new Skeleton King made their way back to the Clash of Clans village with perfect timing for the spooky month of October. The royal ghost also ended up staying to help out the Skeleton King adjust even more and stayed for a little bit inside of the Clash of Clans village throughout the month of October. And that there is the story of how the Barbarian King died and became the Skeleton King. A new glowing beast of destruction has just made likely the coolest entrance into the Clash Royale arenas ever. Being shot down from space, this purple golem made a massive dent in the arena, landing in his very own meteor. Once the meteor landed, the radioactive elixir began spreading all over the arena, turning it into a Halloween-themed arena. So where did this meteor come from? And what is the strange radioactive elixir that was inside of the meteor all along? And most importantly, how was this brand new elixir golem created? Find out all of that inside of today's story, how the elixir golem was brought into the world of Clash. The origin story of the elixir golem started a long time ago, back in 2015. Back then, battles were not as balanced as they were today. The Red King's favorite deck used to be a rocket cycle, and so it goes without saying that he didn't win too many battles. In fact, he would just get absolutely destroyed by the Blue King every time they played each other. And even after the Red King decided to finally switch his decks, he still kept losing because he just wasn't as experienced with the rest of the decks as the Blue King was. So the Red King was tired of losing and he needed to find a way back on top. But because he just wasn't skilled enough with regular decks, he thought that he would have to do something a little sketchy to win. And so he began crafting his master plan. He gathered the most powerful and most knowledgeable troops in the Clash universe all into one room. He got the wizard, the witch, and the master builder, the greatest minds in the lands. And then he asked them to put their minds together and create the strongest troop this arena has ever seen. And so the three brainiacs got to work creating the Red King a new super troop. The three troops started brainstorming, and they figured that they had two types of resources to work with, elixir and dark elixir. And as of right now, those were the only two types of elixir that they could use to create troops from. But then, the wizard had the bright idea of saying that, what if they created a new and even more powerful type of elixir to create the ultimate super troop? The witch and the master builder loved the idea, and so they began crafting. After many long days of mixing potions, chanting spells, and doing smart people things, they thought that it was finally getting close. They had a giant cauldron filled with this new elixir. The elixir looked like regular elixir, except it was glowing and radiating an immaculate amount of energy from it. This new super elixir was so unstable that the trio of brainiacs called it radioactive elixir. And then during the final stages of development, the wizard decided to add his golem formula to it just to see if it works. Sort of like a bit of a test run. The wizard dumped in all of the ingredients and then the radioactive elixir began to bubble and steam. It started to get more and more violent until the radioactive elixir finally started to boil over. The elixir poured out of the cauldron and then started to rise up. It just kept rising higher and higher until it was towering over the Red King who was watching. The giant blob of radioactive elixir then raised its arms to destroy the king and the trio. But right before it came smashing down, the wizard sent a fireball hurtling right at the radioactive golem. The giant blob exploded into a pool of radioactive elixir. The pool of elixir just laid on the ground, but then only a few seconds after, the pool of elixir began to move. It began moving towards each other and reforming into another elixir golem. The Red King panicked, and after almost having that beast kill him, he quickly ordered the witch to get rid of that thing. So the witch cast a quick spell and had all the radioactive elixir put back into the cauldron. She then levitated the cauldron over to the nearest mortar and poured it all in. And then right after that, she set the mortar setting to the max setting and then fired it away. The elixir got sent hurtling towards the atmosphere and then went straight into outer space. After they finally got rid of that monster and dodged a massive bullet, the Red King ordered the witch, the wizard, and the master builder to forget what happened here and never speak of it ever again. So the troops left and never mentioned a word of it again, as per the Red King's orders. And then the Red King went on with his battles as if nothing had ever happened, and none of the troops knew any of this, as it was all done in secrecy. At least it was that way, until a few days ago, when that same blob of elixir came crashing down on the arena. It turned out that while it was in space, it collected a bunch of dust and other rocks where it froze the radioactive elixir inside of it, and so when it came crashing down on the arena, it began leaking all of the radioactive elixir back out. And this time, the elixir golem wanted revenge on the Red King for shooting him into outer space. And so when he started to form out of that meteor, he went straight for the Red King and smashed his king tower into a pile of rubble. And that there is the story of how the elixir golem was brought into the world of Clash. The healer is one of the 10 original troops that were in Clash of Clans when it was very first released to the world. She is a strong support troop at the mid-tier town halls like Town Hall 7 and Town Hall 8, where she is great at helping keep alive giants for much longer. Then once moved on to Town Hall 9 and above, she is most known for her role that she plays in Queen Walk attacks, where they stick to her like glue and do their best to ensure that she doesn't die. The healer is likely the most unique troop in all of Clash of Clans, as she is the only support troop in the village. She does no damage and by herself she is useless. However, add her to most armies and she can change the entire outcome of the battle. Being a support troop, she's often forgotten or not given enough credit, but in today's story, we're going to give her the spotlight and I'll tell you my version of how the healer came into the world of Clash. A very, very long time ago, back at the very beginning of Clash of Clans in 2012, all of the villagers were getting ready and preparing the village in anticipation for the grand opening of their village. It was a few days before the release date of August 2nd, 2012, and Clash of Clans was going to open their doors to the entire world. So, the builders were finishing the last of their buildings, the troops were getting their armor and weapons ready, and the villagers were making sure everything was running in tip-top shape. The next few days were a bit hectic as everyone was anxious to begin battling against other villages, and once the day finally came, everyone in the village went nuts, especially the barbarians. They literally could not wait to get into battle. Anyway, the barbarians and the rest of the troops left the village to go and attack their very first base ever. And while they went to go search for their first base, another village's army spotted their village and began closing in on it. As they prepared to attack the village, all of the builders and villagers ran into their builder huts or the town hall to save themselves. But for some reason, one single villager stopped outside of the town hall rather than going in. The rest of the villagers urged her to join them inside, but the villager refused. She told them that they would destroy our town hall with all of you guys inside. You'll all die. Now, of course this wasn't true, however, at the time, the villagers did not know this, and Aurora, the name of the villager who refused to go inside, stood outside the town hall as the doors were closed and locked shut. She turned around to face the oncoming army. She picked up a weapon off of the barracks weapon rack, and then the army quickly made work of the village, and after they finished off all of the village's last defenses, they approached the town hall. Aurora stood in front, guarding the town hall, quite pathetically might I add, and then the troops stopped before attacking, and humorously looked at Aurora, an unskilled and pathetic last defense to the town hall. Then nervously, Aurora yelled at the army, "Stop, or face my wrath." Then she started doing a bunch of practice kicks and tried her best to intimidate them with her combat skills. Obviously, none of this stunted the army for even a second. However, they did watch and laugh at the pathetic villager who was attempting to stop an entire army all by herself. After getting a really good laugh out of it, the army had finally had enough and decided it was time to just end it, since time was running out of the battle anyways. The army quickly marched forward and effortlessly took out Aurora. Unfortunately, unlike the rest of the troops in the village, villagers could actually be killed and were not able to be brought back to life through the barracks. And the rest of the villagers saw this from inside the town hall. They all screamed out, "No!" and couldn't believe she just sacrificed herself to protect all of them. And without having much time to dread on the death of their friend, the army continued to close in on the town hall. The rest of the villagers sadly accepted their fate, however, right before the army could make it to the town hall, they just turned around and it turns out that the time limit for the battle had run out, and Aurora's attempt at intimidating them had distracted them long enough to save them from all being killed. So the rest of the villagers came running out and decided that they needed to have the most respectful and significant funeral ever for Aurora, who had sacrificed herself to save everyone else. So before the village's army had come back, the villagers and builders had dug a small grave and buried Aurora. They then said a few words about her bravery and how they will always respect and remember what she did for them. Then shortly after the funeral had ended, the village's army had returned home from their battles. They were all in very high spirits as they had just won the majority of their battles. However, once they got closer to all of the villagers and builders who were all gathered around, they sensed a bit of sad and depressing vibes. So the wizard asked what was going on. One of the villagers told the wizard how Aurora had sacrificed herself to save everyone else, and now they had buried her in respect for what she did. The wizard looked at them and told them, you guys do know that even if they do destroy the town hall, you guys are all safe, right? I put a special spell on the basement of the town hall so that you guys will all be safe no matter what happens to the town hall. All of the villagers and builders looked around anxiously at each other, thinking it sure would have been nice to know this beforehand. So now it turned out that Aurora's sacrifice had been in vain. However, at the time, Aurora, like all the others, believed that they were not safe, and yet she still willingly sacrificed herself. All of the other troops would forever remember Aurora for her selfless act in sacrificing herself with the thought of saving everyone else. And then the next day, a bunch of trees that had never been there before had sprouted up in the middle of the Clash of Clans village. The troops all saw this as a small sign, that these trees had grown due to Aurora, who had been buried and a part of the ground. So all of the villagers thought that Aurora's spirit had spread to the ground and sprouted a bunch of plants, and every time a new tree or something would sprout, or any time they would walk by a tree, they would stand there and applaud the tree or Aurora's spirit as a small way to say thank you for her sacrifice. And that's why you can still see, to this day, villagers going around randomly clapping at trees. The passing of Aurora caused a tough time for all of the troops in the village. They were all extremely distraught and upset that one of the most selfless troops in the entire village was now gone forever. It was terribly sad, but unfortunately there was no good way of bringing her back. Not to mention, back at the beginning of Clash there was no witch, so resurrecting Aurora wasn't even an option. The troops in the village felt extremely sad and helpless as there was nothing that they could do, except pray for Aurora. So all of the troops prayed and wished for Aurora to be brought back, but nothing worked. Then one day, the wizard mentioned how whenever he had to make spells, he had to sacrifice or get rid of something into the spell to make it work. And he suggested that maybe it worked in a similar way for praying to the leprechauns gods, where they would have to make some sacrifices. All of the troops thought that the wizard's logic made sense, so they all began gathering some items and such to sacrifice. Some of the troops decided to grab a large boulder that was in the middle of the base and added that to the altar where they set on fire and destroyed the items. The rock didn't burn until they got 10 dragons to simultaneously breathe fire onto it at the same time. And after the rock was successfully sacrificed, the wizard came by and told the troops, "Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that the more powerful the items you sacrifice, the more likely the gods will be able to hear you. So sacrificing a rock probably won't help too much." But it was too late, the rock was already gone. And that is actually the reason as to why that particular rock is no longer in the game anymore. So the troops regrouped and decided to try sacrificing some other stuff. For example, the wizards gave away their spellbook that would have allowed them to cast spells other than just a fireball. The giant sacrificed his little cannon that he used to hold beside him. Even the goblins gave away all of their stashes of gold. That was just how badly everyone wanted Aurora to be given a second chance at life. They all brought their sacrifices to the altar by the campfire that was closest to the water, and then they began burning all of their sacrifices. They then ushered a little prayer under their breath, asking the leprechauns gods to bring Aurora back to life. Thankfully, it was a quieter day, and the leprechauns gods were able to hear their prayer. Unfortunately though, they couldn't simply just bring Aurora back to life, otherwise the villagers would expect this anytime any important troop died. And so rather than just snapping their fingers and poofing Aurora back into the village as if nothing had ever happened, instead they decided that they would have to resurrect her, but not as her old self, but rather as something new, something that represented exactly what she stood for, and something that the rest of the troops could look up to her for. So when the leprechauns gods resurrected her, they turned her into an angel, to represent how selfless and caring she was, and to top off the angel look, they gave her 2 angelic wings so that she could fly around freely. But the biggest part that they added for her was a special power, where they gave her a special healing power so that she was selfless and always trying to protect and help others, like when she sacrificed herself for the rest of the villagers. So shortly after all of the troops finished their sacrifices, they all looked to the sky in anticipation for the leprechauns gods to grant their wish. So they sat there and waited, but for a little while nothing happened. They were just staring at a blank sky. But then finally, after the leprechauns gods were finally done resurrecting Aurora, she came floating down from the sky in front of all the awaiting troops. Aurora greeted the rest of the troops as they all stood there with their mouths hung open, not believing that this actually worked. Aurora was welcomed back into the Clash of Clans village with open arms and was almost praised as a hero. And no more was she just a regular old villager. After showing her bravery in battle, the village chief asked her if she would like to join the army, but not to fight, but instead to use her new healing powers to help keep her fellow troops alive. Aurora agreed to help. She figured now that she has all these amazing abilities, she may as well use them for the good of the army. So she ended up joining the army, where she would shoot her magical beams of healing towards her friendly troops. She was obviously beloved by all and everyone's favorite to have in the army camp with them. And then not only was she loved in attacks, but she was also helpful back at the village, where she would use her abilities to help the wizard make some heal spells, so that when she wasn't able to be in the attack with the army, they would still be able to use some of her healing abilities. And not only did she help the wizard make heal spells, but also she acted as the village doctor, where she would treat all of the troops' injuries, big or small, whenever they needed them. And things went on like this for a very long time, where the healer was the backbone of many attacks, whether it be keeping big groups of troops alive or keeping the most valuable hero, the Archer Queen, alive during battles. And that there is the story on how the healer was brought into the world of Clash. Who would have thought that by adding a harmless healer into the chaotic Clash Royale arena that she would tear it up and start wrecking opponents? To build off my most recent healer origin stories, here is the brand new Battle Healer's origin story. For many years, the healer has been beloved by her village and fellow troops. I mean, who wouldn't like her? All she would do is help keep them alive during battles and help heal them up after battles. Being the only healer in the village, she always had a lot of work to do, but normally she didn't mind, because she was just that type of person who loved to help out others. But sometime recently, things in the village really started to pick up. her army must have been getting a lot worse lately because she had to do almost twice as much healing as usual, and so she was very overworked and was getting very tired. She was so exhausted that she began doing a not so great job of healing other troops. She was so bad that she accidentally turned some troops into trees and random buildings. And seeing as the healer was having a hard time, the wizard decided to brew up some heal spells and start helping out. This gave the healer a bit of a break. However, while the troops were using the heal spells instead of the healer, the troops started to like using the spells a lot more than waiting in the super long lines to see the healer after every battle. This potion just went down easier and was way more convenient for them, and so they decided to like that better. They liked the wizard's healing potion so much more, and the village chief even started using her less in battles because the heal spells were just better, and then they saved more space in the army camps. Not to mention, the village chief also started using her less in battles since he began thinking that the healer was just too fragile to be used in battle. The healer felt betrayed, because she had spent literally all of her time healing up the other troops, and as soon as they finally found some alternative to her, they just completely abandoned her like that. As if everything she's done for them meant nothing. She felt like none of them even liked her, and were literally just using her for her healing abilities. There were still, however, some troops who continued to use her abilities and were genuinely thankful for her. So for that reason, she still stuck around the village for many years after. However, during one special event, the Ice Wizard came to visit the Clash of Clans village for a little bit. During that time, he spent a lot of time with the healer, because he was being used a lot in battles and obviously getting injured during them. And so he would see the healer to heal his wounds after battles. The healer got to talk a lot with the Ice Wizard, and he would tell her all these stories about what it was like at the Clash Royale arenas. They ended up spending so much time together that they became really good friends. And once the Ice Wizard's time was done at the Clash of Clans village, he invited the healer back to the Clash Royale arena with him to see what it was all about. And since the healer didn't have much to do at the village, she decided to go along. And since the Ice Wizard was a legendary card, the king especially liked him and even offered to let the healer try out a single battle. The healer was really excited to finally get back into some battles, so the king gave her a set of princess armor to help protect her out there, and then she headed out onto the battlefield with no weapon. But as soon as she got out there, she started doing what healers do best: healing. At first it wasn't bad because she was healing her own team's troops, but as the battle progressed, she started to heal the enemy's troops too. The king was watching all of this unfold and couldn't believe what he was seeing. The healer just stood there on her side of the bridge, healing the enemy troops as they came in and attacked the king's tower. And thanks to the help of the healer, she helped keep the enemy troops alive just long enough for them to take out the king's tower. After watching this unfold, the king was absolutely furious. He went up to the healer and started to tear her apart and almost verbally assault her. He was yelling in her face, saying things like, "You're useless, you don't deserve to be here, and you will never be a troop in this arena." After hearing all of this from the king, the healer felt a mixture of emotions, ranging from upset and sad all the way to furious and raging with anger. In fact, she was so mad that the next battle, she stormed out onto the battlefield, picked up a sword from a fallen knight, and started to float towards the king that just said all those mean things to her. As she got closer, he kept shooting her with his cannon, but as she was floating closer, she began to self-heal. Turns out some troops, when they get mad, they just turn purple and start to rage, and attack quicker and faster and harder. But the healer was a special case, because when she got mad, she would start to radiate some healing energy, instead of rage with anger. Not only would she heal herself, but as soon as she took a swing at the king's tower, a wave of healing washed over herself and any troops near her. And this repeated every swing she took, where the anger would overwhelm her and the healing would just come out whenever she took a swing. That being said, she didn't do a whole lot of damage to the king's tower when she did attack, for the obvious reason that she never used a sword before and was quite weak. But thanks to her healing, she was able to stay there and attack the king's tower for long enough that she took it all down, all by herself. After taking out the king's tower, the king quickly apologized and said that he was wrong and he would be honored to have her on her team, if she could just do that special healing stuff all the time. And so during the next few days, the healer accepted and she trained herself to get herself to the point where she was raging with anger again, so that she could repeat the healing effects that she just did. And after a decent amount of practice, she was able to cue the healing effect on command, where whenever she wasn't attacking, she would just focus and start to self-heal. And she would still be able to release that heal effect whenever she attacked, as it would just overwhelm her and then spread out in a circle around her. And ever since then, she has been absolutely killing it in the arena, and beloved by all troops, might I add, who just hide themselves behind her as she soaks up all the damage and heals them in the process. I mean, what more could you ask for from a troop? And anyways, that there is the story of how the battle healer came into the world of Clash. story of the Yeti begins a long time ago, back at the beginning of Clash. Back then, as many of you already know, there were 10 original troops that you could use inside of the barracks. But what you may not know was that there was actually an 11th troop back then, but that just wasn't available in the barracks. This other troop was a big, strong, hairy creature that had horns, and was basically like a giant. The one problem with it though was that he was way too nice to be in battles. Rather than to attack the enemies, he would simply try to befriend everyone instead of trying to destroy them. Obviously, this proved to be an issue for the king because he needed stone-cold killers and beasts in his army, not jolly good fellows that are friends with everyone. And since the troop was of no use to the king, he had no choice but to banish the troop from the village. And for a long time, everyone in the village, including the chief, had forgotten about this troop. So once this new troop was banished from the Clash of Clans village, where did he go? Wherever the wind blew him. He started to travel up north in search of some new friends. He wandered for a long time, but never found anyone. He kept wandering to a point where it started to get really, really cold, and snow started to fall from the sky. He decided to keep going a bit further, but if he didn't find anyone, he would just head back, because he couldn't really stand the cold for too long. But as he continued walking, he heard some mini screams coming from the distance. He quickly ran over to see where the screams were coming from, and when he got there, he saw a bunch of furry little pink fur balls being chased around by some sort of ice golem. He hated to see this, and he quickly jumped to the fur ball's defense. He fought off the ice golem and forced him to retreat. And once he scared off the ice golems, he turned over to the cute-looking fur balls. He asked if they were okay, and they all nodded back in return. He had no idea what these little furball things were, and they had no idea who or what he was, but after being saved by him, the furballs immediately fell in love with him. They quickly huddled up to him and bounced up and down. The new troop was really happy to see this and felt super thrilled that he had just made not just one friend, but tons of them. It was starting to get cold, so the new troop made their way over to the cave where he got himself nice and warm. But because they were so much smaller than him, they had a hard time keeping up sometimes. And so the new troop made a small basket that had slung over his back just like a backpack, so that he could carry his little friends around with him wherever he wanted. As time went by, the new troop started to get hairier and hairier, so much to the point that it completely covered his body and face. This worked out well because it helped protect him from the freezing cold outside, and that meant that he could leave his cave without getting cold. The fur on his body grew the color white, and so he almost resembled an abominable snowman, or a yeti. So for a long time, the Yeti and his little Yeti mites, as he liked to call them, enjoyed themselves by playing games in the snow and just having an overall fun time every day. But one day, they were playing a game and one of the Yeti mites ran away. The Yeti couldn't find the Yeti mite, and so he started to follow the footsteps in the snow. He followed them for a long time, but at a certain point, the footsteps stopped because there was no more snow. And in the distance, the Yeti could hear the sound of other troops and buildings and what sounded like a village. So he thought that his little friend may have gone over there. So the Yeti made his way over to the Clash of Clans village, and once he got there, he looked around for a bit while all of the other troops looked at him awkwardly, wondering who the heck this hairy beast was. Finally, the Yeti found his lost Yeti mite hiding behind some defense called a scattershot or something like that. The Yeti picked up his Yeti mite and was about to be on his way back to the cave. But on the way back, he passed by someone who looked very familiar, the village chief. He was standing right beside the town hall. The Yeti got super angry when he remembered that it was him who had banished him from the Clash of Clans village. And when the Yeti got angry, one of the Yeti mites sensed the Yeti's anger and immediately hopped out of the basket and charged the king. The Yeti mite then threw himself into the king and the town hall and then exploded. And before the Yeti mite himself could charge the village chief, the barbarian king stepped in and told him, Whoa there, we don't want any trouble, friend. What are you here for?" The Yeti's ears perked up at the word friend, and he immediately calmed down, and remembered that he just wanted to make new friends. He told the king that he was just here to search for his long-lost friend and that he was going to be on his way. But the king thought that the Yeti would make a super powerful new troop for the village considering his size and strength and his little friends. And so he told the Yeti that if he wanted, he could stay in the village and possibly fight in the army. And also that he could have way more friends if he stayed here. And once again, all the Yeti needed to hear was that he would have way more friends at the village, and so he agreed. And although he was still a super friendly troop, and you wouldn't think that he would attack any troops or defenses, you would be wrong, because any defenses or defending clan castle troops that attack any one of his friends will just make him mad, and he will start attacking whatever. And since his little Yeti mites like him so much, that when the Yeti is taken out, the Yeti might send themselves flying into whatever the nearest defense building is. Or whenever the Yeti gets mad himself, they start hopping off his back and fighting whatever is closest. And that there is the story of how the Yeti came into the world of Clash. The newest hero in Clash of Clans is a serious force to be reckoned with. She's named the Royal Champion, and for a good reason. Being a skilled fighter with a spear, she can wreck a decent fraction of a base all by herself. The village is obviously happy to have her on their team, but where did the skilled fighter come from? Where it appeared that she just appeared out of completely nowhere. Someone of her caliber would have required years of training and practice, and even with that much training, most troops still wouldn't be able to be as powerful as her. So who is this incredibly powerful new hero in Clash of Clans, and how did she find her way to the Clash of Clans village? Find out all of that inside of today's story, the Royal Champion's origin story. Surprisingly enough, the Royal Champion's story starts off in Clash Royale with the Blue King. A little while ago, the Blue King was having a really tough time. He was trying to push trophies super hard to get into one of the highest leagues possible, but for some reason he just couldn't make it into the next league. He tried using new decks and new troops, but nothing seemed to work. So one day when a new baby troop showed up at his doorsteps, he saw it as an opportunity to help get himself into one of the highest possible arenas. The baby came at the same time that the Ram Rider was introduced into the arenas, and it sort of resembled the Ram Rider in some way. But nonetheless, the king didn't question any of it, and he took the baby in and raised it as his own. The king loved the baby and gave it nothing but the best care. And the moment the baby was old enough, he gave her the best combat training too. The king had big plans to make the new troop into the best possible troop in the arena, that only he could use. So for a very long time, the king hid her away from the Red King and the rest of the other troops. He kept her in the now abandoned training camp arena, where every single day she would train. All day, every day. She was never allowed outside the arena or to see any of the other troops for the reason that the king didn't want anyone finding out about his little secret. The new troop became so incredibly good with all weapons and fighting techniques. But after she mastered all of the weapons, she wound up choosing the spear as her weapon of choice, as it was considered to be the most skilled and powerful weapon to use. But since the spear left a little bit of vulnerability on defense, she decided to add a shield in as well. But since this shield was sort of boring and she had already mastered all of the other weapons, she started to train with the shield. And after a ton of training, she could successfully use the shield not only on defense but on offense as well. And then after even more training on top of that, she could also use the shield as a sort of boomerang, where she would throw the shield off one of the buildings and it would bounce from one building to another before it finally ran out of momentum. And even after she had mastered the shield toss, she still had extra time, since the king never came back to get her until one day before Christmas. The king showed up one day at the abandoned arena and called for her. He didn't even give her a name, and so he basically just called her over by saying, "Yoo-hoo, over here." The king asked to see what she could do, and so she showed him her skills with the spear and the shield and all of the other weapons. And he was thoroughly impressed. The king then brought his new troop over to the Clash Royale arena for her grand reveal to the entire Clash universe. The king told the new troop that he brought her here for a reason, and that reason was because he needed her help to get to one of the highest possible arenas, the Grand Champion Arena. If he wins this next battle, he will be promoted to the Grand Champion. So for the first battle ever, the Grand Champion fought against all of the other troops and shredded through them with ease. She helped the Blue King come to an easy win in the match and advance to the next arena. The new troop was expecting the king to be extremely grateful and happy with her, since she had literally been training her whole life for this one reason, just to help the king get to this arena. She couldn't wait to see how he would say thank you and show his appreciation. And so after the match, the Blue King came over to the troop and said, "Nice, now get ready for the next battle." And that was it. The new troop was super upset and disappointed, since she had literally been training her whole life in complete isolation, locked away from everyone else, just so that he could say, "Nice." She was so powerful that she decided that she didn't need this. She was better off without him. And he was never much of a father figure anyway, so she didn't owe him anything. She was better than to just be some other troop that the king got to boss around and use to move up the ranks, and so she decided to leave and run away. With her amazing cardio, she ran all the way to the Clash of Clans village, and when she got there, she ran right into the middle of the battle without breaking a sweat. She ran into the middle of the ongoing battle, where it looked like the Clash of Clans king was yelling at his troops to retreat for some reason. She saw this as an opportunity to rush in and save the day, and so she did. She ran into the middle of the battle and threw her shield, which hit 4 defenses and completely destroyed them. And she then went on to help destroy the rest of the base and give the rest of the troops the confidence they needed to take out the base, rather than retreat like the pathetic Barbarian King. After the battle was done, the Barbarian King asked her who she was, because that was incredible. Unfortunately, she didn't have a name. Instead, she just said, "Call me the Royal Champion," just like one of the top Clash Royale arenas. And after that battle, the Barbarian King brought the Royal Champion back to the Clash of Clans village and offered for her to stay there, since all of the other troops already looked up to her after her heroics. And since all of the troops already looked up to her after her heroics, that she could also be a hero inside of the Clash of Clans village. The Royal Guardian quickly accepted the Barbarian King's offer, and the rest was history. And that there is the story of how the Royal Champion, the newest hero inside of Clash of Clans, was brought into the world of Clash.